May 19th meeting of the Planning Commission to order. First off, let's go with a roll call. Looks like Mr. Schulen. Greetings.
Good to see you.
Mr. Kohler.
Here.
Ms. Ishii.
Here.
Mr. Sharp.
Here.
And I'm here, Mr. Light. And I believe Mr. Whitson is on the phone or connected somehow?
Yeah, I'm here via Zoom. I'm here.
Greetings. And I believe
Thank you.
Mr. Henry is absent.
Yeah, Mr. Chair, I just do want to point out, you have agenda item F1 for the brewing company. We do have a sign language interpreter here for that event, and if it would please the commission, would be great if we could move that towards the beginning of the agenda so she can be on her way when that item is completed.
Certainly think that's a good idea, but before we get to adopting the agenda, maybe we should take the next item, which is the Pledge of Allegiance. So I would mind if you all rise and pledge to the flag. I pledge
allegiance to the flag of the United States of America and to the republic for which it stands, one nation under God, indivisible, with liberty and justice for all.
And with that, I believe the request was pretty clear to move the preliminary review of the Veditz and Company Brewing LLC agenda item perhaps up ahead of the public hearing. Is that a reasonable place? Yeah, I think that makes sense. Any other suggestions? Now, I understand also, let's see, I understand that the renewal of the Mulkey Mountain Agricultural and Forestall District is also off the agenda.
Yes, sir, that will be postponed to the next meeting.
Any other suggested changes to the agenda? If not, I would entertain a motion to adopt the amended agenda.
I'll make that motion.
I'll second.
All in favor?
Aye.
Thank you all. Next item is the adoption of the minutes from the April 7th work session.
Mr. Chairman, this is Peter Woodson. I noted
Mr. Whitson, before you get into that, if you could just note that you advised the vice chairman that you.
I'm sure I apologize. I did advise the vice chairman by email that pursuant to the planning commission's electronic meeting policy, I'm participating via the Zoom meeting platform. And for the record, I am participating from my hometown of West Bend, Wisconsin. And this is the first planning commission meeting in which I am participating electronically, which is allowed under state code. And I appreciate you accommodating me in this regard. And Mr. White, thank you for chairing the meeting this evening. I'm grateful.
You're welcome, and thank you for clarifying why I am indeed doing that. You were saying, Mr. Whitson.
Yes, sir. In the April 7th work session meeting minutes, I did note maybe one small typographic error, and this poor gentleman suffers all the time from having E's put in the wrong place. Mr. Curry's name should be RRY without an E. Under the heading call to order in the third paragraph.
Maybe we can get that one added to spell check.
Yeah, but I think, as always, I appreciate Ms. Lee's hard work on the minutes. Otherwise, I didn't see anything that jumped out at me in those. And then in the April 21st meeting minutes, I did see one other typographic error, but if I cannot locate it quickly, I will stand down.
Thank you. While you're looking for that, do any of the other commissioners have any comments, suggestions for the minutes?
Are we just on the April 7th?
I think we'll vote on them separately, but, I think as Mr. Whitson has done, if you've got the floor and you want to talk about your comments on both, feel free.
I just had a couple of small typo graphical amendments on the the April 21st, if that's in order right now.
Sure. Would you like to articulate those or perhaps just hand them off?
I can do it either way. They're small. What would the chair's desire be on that?
I'm fine with, if they truly are editorial in nature, trusting that you'll hand them off and we can move to have those changes made if,
Okay.
I'm fine with that.
That's fine with me. Thank you.
Any other feedback on the minutes? Mr. Whitson, did you find yours?
Yeah, there was an extraneous or extra W at the bottom of page 2, preliminary review is all the 2 Ws, but Ms. Issue might have already caught that one.
I did
That
not.
was what I was searching for.
There you go. With that, let's take them one at a time. I would entertain a motion, if there's no further suggestions, to approve the minutes of the April 7th work session.
I move to approve them. The April 7th work session minutes.
Is there a second?
I'll second. Here.
Thank you. Could be a long night. All in favor?
Aye. Mr. Chairman, I abstain. I was not here for that meeting.
Oh, okay, thank you. How about for the April 21st meeting minutes?
I can move again to accept those with a few minor editorial changes.
Second?
All in favor?
Aye.
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 Thank you very much. With that, and according to our revised agenda, why don't we move to the first item listed under old business, preliminary review of special exception number 20-12-01, the Veddets and Company Brewing LLC. Let's see, Ms. Summers, do you have a staff intro on this?
The applicants are requesting to operate a brewery pursuant to 170-76F and 170-67E. The property is located at 11961 Lee Highway, Berryville, and is just a little under a half an acre. The property is Vector Highway Commercial. We had reviewed this at a previous meeting. It was requested the applicants provide a site plan, and that has been submitted, reviewed, and found to be complete. I believe the applicants have also provided a presentation as well to answer any other questions the commission may have at this time. Again, this is a preliminary review. If you deem so, we can schedule a public hearing for the next meeting.
Thank you, Ms. Summers. I know the applicant is here, and I do appreciate the provision of the PowerPoint. I do want to say, though, that I don't think I think there's a lot in the PowerPoint about the business plan and et cetera that isn't really germane to tonight's presentation. So I'm going to ask the applicant if there's anything that is not present in the materials provided that you would like to clarify or add at this point in time. Otherwise, we'll come back to you with questions as needed.
Yeah, so thank you, Planning Commission, for hearing this application. I'm joined tonight by Veddets proprietors Joey Seifner and Greg Randall. You'll recall at the last Planning Commission meeting, we were requested to do an engineered site plan, which we provided by Racy Engineering. They've designed a parking lot, which more than accommodates the use. And I guess I would say that if there are any questions related to the property, that would be my territory. Any questions related to brewing application, that would be the proprietor's territory.
Thank you. This is a preliminary review, so we will not be specifically taking comments on this, although actually, yes, the public comment period's a little further down, so we will come to that. Ms. Ishii, this is in your district, so I guess I would turn to you first if you would like to initiate the conversation.
Thank you very much. I would like to thank the applicants, first of all, for coming forward with a site plan, and obviously you've put work into a presentation, and to thank you also, Mr. Chapman, for the work you've done in Sperryville, and you've had several businesses now that have added, I think, to the community, and that's very positive and much appreciated. On this one, I have a few questions that I can start with, and maybe then I'll turn it over to others to finish and come back if necessary. But on the site plan, as I understand this, and maybe you can clarify it, you're showing employee and commercial vehicle parking on the site itself, and it's on the adjacent parcel that you're showing 20 parking lots. Did I read that properly?
That's correct. The parcel, the brewery is located on one parcel, the parking lot's located on the other, both owned by myself. Same entity.
And are you intending to merge those properties in any way? I know we had brought up at one point, in our last meeting on this, that what if that were to be sold off separately at some point, or what guarantee would there be that there would always be that parking available for this property, for this use?
As long as there's a brewery there, there'll be a parking lot there for the brewery. Certainly, there's no upside to combining parcels, probably as any realtor can tell you. Down the line, I might want to build something on that parcel. If it stays a brewery, that's fantastic. I would prefer it stay a brewery with the adjacent parking lot.
Could I interject
Absolutely.
something just to
Please.
clarify there? You're only applying for the permit for the one parcel, not the parking? Because it does not have to be merged. It could simply be included as what is getting the permit, both parcels. That's not requiring you to merge the two lots. Is that something you're willing to do?
Well, the permit is for the brewery located in the...
But the parking is part of that operation, right? I mean, we wouldn't give it to you without that. Or the supervisors would not. If it had no parking, you would not get the permit. True. Okay.
I think what he's probably saying is that the provision of the parking would be a condition of the permit. So if the parking goes away, the permit goes away.
So why not just add that parcel to the permit?
Well, I mean, this is... Okay.
I mean, I'm just saying, is that something that you would do?
As long as it doesn't shoot down this and slow down this process, yeah, sure.
Well, I appreciate where you're going, Mr. Sharp, but I don't think it's really our responsibility to suggest alternatives. I think we have an application before us. This topic has been discussed in great detail, and I think we have an application, and I think this is a significant concern. I share it. I personally couldn't support this unless there's some kind of tie between the parking and the property with the brewery, because there's simply no way, despite promises to the contrary, that this property could be sold and the next owner could decide in any way that they would like to remove the parking, and therefore the brewery would be left in place with nothing but street parking. And I personally find that totally unacceptable. So I think that issue has been raised, but how they choose to deal with that, I think is up to them.
Okay.
And so just, go ahead.
Oh, I'm sorry.
No,
Sir.
please.
There was a reference made in one of the highway department letters that said they didn't understand what short-term rentals were going to be. Did I read that correctly? there was something said about short-term rentals.
That was for a previous iteration of what I was going to use the property for, so
Oh, so there's nothing. Okay,
that's no bearing on this.
okay, okay, that's fine.
Right, that was for apartments or something, as I recall, in the building.
Yeah.
Okay, so that's,
That's not part of this anymore.
okay, that's
So I
fine.
have no applications or anything before you.
That's fine.
Okay.
Ms. Shishie, I don't know, were you finished? I think we've been talking about
Others can go ahead. I have a few more questions, but I'm happy to have others go first. Thank you.
No, go ahead. I kind of interrupted.
No, those are good. That was one of mine, so
Oh,
you took
okay.
care of that. Yeah, just, well, there are a number of questions. I think, I mean, the use of this property as a brewery is very attractive and appealing. I think the main issue is going to be having ample space to accommodate the kind of traffic we're likely to have in such an attractive property. And so there would have to be ample overflow for employees, for commercial vehicles, which I think you've tried to accommodate on the parcel itself under your site plan, if I read that right. But I do know that, VDOT raised the issue of constructing barriers and also just making sure there's adequate parking so that there's no backing up onto 211, there's no parking on 211. And we had discussed last time, and I frankly have lost a little bit track of what numbers we all were discussing, but, in the range of, I think if I'm not mistaken, you said 20 to 30, well, maybe, how many did you say people would be in the tasting room at one time? Up to 20, is that what you said?
Potentially.
And then another 10 to 15 potentially in the rear area, so that's 35 at least people, which may be 35 cars at a time up to that. So there was questions about vehicle trips that would generate versus actual cars, but also if you've got 20 parking spaces and 35 cars, there's the obvious places is people are gonna try to squeeze it on Main Street or possibly park along the side of 211, which would be, a real problem, especially on big weekends when we got traffic just pouring into the park there. So that would just be a question, how would you accommodate more than 20 cars if you have 20 spaces even allocated on this adjacent parcel?
Well, I think it would be obvious from driving by that the parking lot would be full, so I don't think people would try to necessarily park. We don't plan on accommodating more cars than the parking lot can handle. So that's a little circular, I don't understand your question. I think the VDOT certainly does not want people parking on the shoulder, but we know that happens all the time. VDOT does not want people backing into 211, but you have Shell service station and burgers and things, which is a disaster waiting to happen. This is a solution to answer VDOT's issues on separate entrances, repairing the shoulder, defining the parking lot, and making that whole property safe. Look at this thing gravel. That entire strip has been gravel for 30 years or so. So this is quite an improvement. And signage and shrubbery, stuff of that nature would clearly direct traffic, I think. So.
Okay, thank you. That's all I have for the moment. Others want to?
Yeah, I just got a question.
Any other? Yeah, please.
Mr. Chapman, I noticed that the employee parking or staff parking, I think you call it, on the other side of the building. From what I can see on this, you would be coming in and parking, parallel parking up and through that space. I don't see how you could turn around in it.
Yeah, front to back.
Front to back. So how do you exit out of there without backing out onto the road?
The shoulder north of that lane is all gravel. The front of the building is currently gravel. I mean, there's space to do that.
Okay, but it's not allocated on this on your property. Is that
Well, we
correct?
would define that lane certainly with gravel and bringing the shoulder up. But, the first 20 feet from 211 north of that lane is all gravel for the jewelry store that's there. So I mean, there is space. But yeah, the cars would be stacked going in
Okay,
parallel to the building.
right. And the plan, correct me, or clarify for me, the plan is to have how many people inside and how many people outside in the beer garden?
We said 20 people inside and 15 people outside. Now, capacity is quantified by building code.
Uh-huh.
And so if building code says the capacity is 12 inside, then there'll be 12 inside. We are kind of estimating at this point, without going through the building permit process and drafting plans as to what the capacity would be. Capacity is not dictated by number of parking spots, which I think Mr. Henry noted in the last meeting, which is not true. Certainly, if the parking lot's full, the parking lot's full. Nobody else is going to get in the building. But the capacity of the building itself is dictated by the building permit process.
But we don't have that exact figure, you're just estimating at the moment. Okay, I mean, I'm just trying to clarify for myself.
Sure.
And how are you going to control it? It sounded like you were going to try to control the number of people in the beer garden. How are you going to control that?
I don't understand your question. If 20 people want to go outside the beer garden and there's only 10 spaces.
So you're going to have seating for
Seating, yeah.
15 and then,
Picnic tables like this over there. Similar to what Hopkins Ordinary does. They've got an outdoor beer garden with seating for probably well more than 10.
okay. All right. That's all I have at the moment.
Any other discussion or comments?
I'm still a little confused about this application taking into consideration just parcel 6B. Are we doing this as if 6A was a part of it? It's kind of confusing.
6A is a jewelry, 6A is a jewelry store, 6 is the parking lot, and 6B is the.
So for the planning commission's benefit, I've pulled up the portion of the county code dealing with off-street parking, specifically section 170-78 general regulations, which they all require off-street parking spaces shall be located on the same lot as the structure or use to which they are accessory, or on a lot contiguous thereto which has the same zoning classification and is under the same ownership, provided that where there are practical difficulties or if the public safety and or public convenience would be better served by a location other than the same lot or contiguous lot, the Board of BZA is applicable acting upon a specific application to authorize such alternative. So the code recognizes that an adjacent parcel could be used. The nature through which that's bound to the permit, I think, is something the Planning Commission and the Board of Supervisors needs to consider, whether it's a condition of the permit or both parcels are listed in the permit. I think either of those methods could be used. That definitely is important through this entire process, but it is legal to use the other one.
All right, thank you.
Well, again, we're at a preliminary review. We have a few choices before us. We could decide to move this on to a hearing, or we could move it on with a recommendation without a hearing. To me, the main issue is the parking, clearly. I think there's some VDOT questions that have yet to be addressed, but presumably they would be. I think that's still open, but I would not be comfortable unless there was a clear dependence on the operation of the brewery with the maintenance of the parking lot. That is, if we conclude that the parking lot as is configured is adequate, and frankly, I'm not terribly confident about that, given the capacity of the production, the nature of the operation. To me, this looks like the prospect of lots of cars being parked along 211. That's my view.
Mr. Light, this is Kierwitz, and I appreciate those comments and have, if you would allow me, just a few related questions. When we first heard from the applicants, I had done a little research about the parking at Hopkins Ordinary and then also at Brewery. And I wonder if the applicants could remind us of, they're intending, they have contemplated production that would be for off-site consumption and then production that would be solely for on-site consumption. I'm wondering if they could remind us of the annual production output for on-site consumption, first of all. Second, in reviewing the RACI engineering cover letter to the site plan and then reviewing the site plan itself, I have not identified any implied or explicit nexus between the number of parking spots and the interior capacity of the building and the beer garden capacity. So I wonder if the applicants or Mr. Chapman might be able to provide some background on what calculation led RACI to determine that 21 spots would in fact be enough. And then finally, I agree wholeheartedly with you, Mr. White, that we need to hear from the public. I believe you were saying that we need to hear from the public on this, and I certainly would support if we all deem this a complete application and move to a public hearing. My colleague on the Board of Supervisors, Ms. Smith, it recently has raised our significant concern in terms of our traffic flow through Sperryville, and I think we cannot take lightly the potential adverse effect of a business like this on a relatively small lot in the place that it is, given our ongoing concerns with traffic and safety in Sperryville, which, by the way, VDOT is now addressing in our request from the Board of Supervisors. So I wonder if the applicant quickly could just remind us of the capacity question I posed, and then enlighten us if they have the information or have any knowledge of it, how RACI engineering determined that 21 parking spots would be sufficient for the capacity. And I will note that 21 parking spots is precisely what Hopkins Ordinary has. And so I also wonder if it's coincidence or if this was keyed in any way off of Hopkins Ordinary and their parking configuration. Thank you, and I apologize for being long-winded.
So, Mr. Whitson, I'll come to the microphone so you can hear me. On your second point about, gosh, what was your second point?
Well, I believe my second point was what is the relationship between the 21 parking spots that RACI engineering suggested would be sufficient and the capacity for the inside of the building and the beer garden.
Sure.
That wasn't my second question. My only other question was about on-site production capacity for on-site consumption in terms of gallons per annum.
Sure. So it's my understanding that RACI Engineering reviewed Rappahannock County Code and did not find a provision for minimum number of parking spaces for breweries. Absent that, they deferred to food and beverage service and came up with 21 based on that number. Also, it was. Sorry, your second add-on to.
I also asked if this was in any way, if the number of parking spots was in any way related to the fact that the nearby brewery, Hopkins Ordinary, has precisely 21 parking spots for their operations.
No, it's not. They are very busy, so that is not something that they undertook. We did all our meetings via Zoom, and the surveyors came out almost overnight. So no, there's no correlation with Hopkins. There is, and I mentioned this before, the capacity of the building is determined by the architect and the building code, which is reviewed through the permit office. That's the capacity of the building. It's number of doors, it's number of access egress, it's whether doors swing out, it's whether doors swing in. That has not been defined yet because we have not reached that point. We have existing access egress. And so we could kind of fumble around with it, but given that we're not at the building permit stage yet, we've really not quantified that. If the capacity of the building is 12 people, then that's the capacity of the building. Then we'll have to limit the number of tables, Viditz and Co. will have to limit the number of tables and seats. So, yeah, go ahead.
And then my other question was on production capacity from on-site consumption, just so we can benchmark this against, well, frankly, the other brewery in Sperryville that's of similar size. Just to understand from a scale perspective, what the owners of the brewery are intending to do.
So I'll answer a couple points, and then I'll let the brewers finish the rest of that question. So Virginia has 3 license levels, under 500, 500 to 10,000, and 10,000 over. So Hopkins Ordinary, which is a small brewery, a nano brewery, and Penn Druid have the same license, under 500 barrels a year. And that's the license that Viditz and Company will be going for. Now, within that, Hopkins Ordinary is a 1-barrel system, which produces X number of gallons of beer a year. I don't know that math.
It's about, I believe it's about 3,000. I'm sorry, it's 100 barrels, about 3,000 gallons a year.
Penn Druid, on the other end of that spectrum, is a 10-barrel system, which, do that math, is 30,000 gallons a year, if that's correct. The owners of Viditz and Company will be starting out with a 1-barrel system, building to a 3.5-barrel system. And if they'd like to expand on that, I'll turn over the interpreter microphone.
So we are flexible with providing off-site as well as on-site sales. Distribution would be in the store.
Can you hear that, Mr. Whitson?
Not well. I don't know if she's in the microphone, I apologize.
Thank you. So we're distributing in a couple of different ways. Tap, retail sales, bottles, cans. So the sale would be in the store part, would be the bottled store. We actually don't believe we're going to be selling all 500 here in this county. We're thinking maybe 100 if we're lucky, just starting off. So it's going to limit the number of individuals that frequent the establishment. We don't expect it to be a free-for-all with people coming in the door left and right. We'd run out of beer before we'd get to capacity at that point.
So did I hear you correctly to say that production for the contemplated production for on-site consumption would be in the range of 100 barrels per year? Is that what you said?
No. We would actually hope to get to the 500. That would be the goal. Of course, we're going to start slow while we're in new business, and then we'll see where we get. I would say the production sold in this very specific brewery in Sperryville would be 100. The other 4 produced would be distributed, maybe sell it to Wegmans, that sort of thing.
Okay, that's what I wanted to know. Okay, so on-site, you think it would be around 100 barrels? Yes, sir.
That is what we are predicting. That would be awesome, actually.
Okay, thank you. That's all I need. Thank you.
If I may, Mr. Whitson, I believe you touched on this, and several of the commissioners have. The brewery lease includes the parking lot. I mean, this is a 3-year lease. It's kind of an experimental lease, 3 years, but it does include the parking lot. So I would, if I decided to sell the property or split it, I mean, I would open myself up. So this 70-page lease we have does include the parking lot.
I don't know as well as you all do, or maybe Mr. Whitson, the capacity of the other 2 breweries. I believe, I have heard that the Penn Druid is, well, at least one of them has, similar capacity. I don't know what their actual production is. I also believe Hopkins has a limit on how much they can produce as part of their arrangement, although I don't know, honestly, the details of that. So I can just kind of anecdotally, for my part, look at kind of the overall situation. When I go by Penn Druid, there's a lot of parking there, there's a lot of room, and there can be a lot of people. And I know when they were at their prior location, they had, granted, they were festivals, but there was parking all along Water Street. And I can imagine this being, a popular place. It sounds like they run a great business, frankly, and it's the kind of place I would like to frequent. I admit that I'm, even with the parking that you're showing, I'm a little concerned and would want to make sure that all of VDOT's requirements about circulation, and they specifically say the county needs to impose conditions to ensure no parking or standing of vehicles on 211. Maybe somebody else can suggest how to do that when you say that we won't. I don't know when you're going to turn people away at the door if you see parking. I don't know what one does. So I think it just has to be built into the plan. And so it's a little concerning to me. I do also consider the fact that, especially if there turns out not to be enough parking on a big weekend, there's going to be a temptation for people to walk across 211 from other areas. And anyway, I guess ample parking for the kind of customer influx one might expect at a really successful brewery at that location would be primary. So these all raise, I have to admit, concerns as the application is submitted. And in terms of what the building permit requires, and in terms of capacity, it's indoor and outdoor. I don't know what that will end up being, but I think that would be important to know for me, to make sure that, we've got ample parking there. So I don't know if anybody else has anything to add on that.
I'm wondering if it would be premature to decide to put this forward to a public hearing. Unless we're holding that tonight.
Well, we're not holding that tonight. We haven't noticed it. I'm open to suggestion. My view is the parking situation is unresolved, and I think if we have a public hearing, we're just going to hear that repeated 100 times. And so I'm not sure what to do about this, because I think we brought it up at the last meeting, and so I'm not sure why we would expect a different outcome if we just bring it up again. I think it's a great use. I think it's the wrong location for that use.
But I'm not sure if we're deciding that tonight.
Well, it's up to us. We don't have to have a hearing. If we didn't feel we needed a hearing to evaluate this application in its current form, we're not required to have a hearing. But I think we can certainly move to have a hearing. I guess I'm just questioning, since we have a very significant outstanding set of questions, I'm not sure what additional value a hearing would have.
If I may.
Please.
So it's great to see everybody again. I just wanted to add, we had the discussion at the last meeting. We are going to heavily focus on distribution of our product. I'm a business person, and so a lot of craft breweries are here in the state of Virginia, and most of them become successful by starting small, but focusing on that distribution. And then, of course, that's when they move on to the next level. So I understand that the parking is the concern. Of course, we want to make sure that the number of people are in the building. They might just be there to pick it up, to go. That was really what we are going to emphasize. So the people that are going to come and drink on site is going to be a lower number, and the people who are taking it to go or using the distribution is going to balance out. And so really, that's what we're going to be doing. We're going to be really heavily emphasizing the distribution, and in the long run, I think that's going to make us even more successful.
I certainly appreciate that, and we're in a difficult spot because, of course, we want to encourage the absolute wildest success imaginable for this business. Unfortunately, our job is to confirm public safety and harmony in the surrounding community, and that's where the parking comes in. And, we've got to take that responsibility to protect the community as our heart. And I'm afraid that the business motive of a lease is not, in my judgment at least, adequate to ensure that our responsibility will be met in this situation. So I'm still open. I mean, I guess I'd like to hear a motion from someone else, and I'm sorry if Mr. Whitson, if I know you're on the line, and I may be forgetting. If you're trying to get a word in, let me know. But I would, I still have. There's no way I could support this application in its current form. I'll just put that on the record.
Mr. Chairman, I'm sorry. I'd like to give the applicant the benefit of a public hearing if they would like to move forward on that. I would wonder if having heard the concerns expressed, whether the applicant is interested in providing additional information. If not, I'm willing to make a motion to move this onto a public hearing. But I don't know whether they feel like there's more information to gather or whether this is where we are and we'd like to move it on.
I think we have a complete application, and there seems to be a great deal of excitement, especially among the breweries existing, as well as the community that I've spoken to, for this use. I don't think we can leave it at that.
Well, if we're going to make a recommendation on this application, we probably should hold a public hearing.
I just have a quick question. Are you going to serve food? I don't recall seeing this in the application.
No, there might be a food truck, but
Okay.
no food sales.
Other than what the food truck sells.
Right, that's a model I've seen in some others.
Yeah.
There's a food truck, but not food sold on the premises per se. Well, in that, I don't know, there, Mr. Whitson or others, before I make a motion.
Mr. Whitson?
All I was going to say is, I was going to ask Mr. Chapman, is there, with those two parcels, is there any room for additional parking, or is that it? Are we maxed out? Because if we're maxed out, then this is what we have to work with, and I don't know that really we can ask the applicant to do anything else regarding our parking concerns.
Yeah, I believe we are pretty much maxed out. We might be able to move some dirt and squeeze one or two more spaces in, but I'd rather not recreate an entire site plan based on that. Actually,
Just.
Well, again, I thank you for that, Mr. Whitson.
And
Go
Ms. Ishii, the other
Yeah,
thing I'll say,
please.
You mentioned, the reason I was asking about production capacity is, we have kind of two variables at play. You have indoor and outdoor space, which Hopkins Ordinary also does. And as it turns out, Hopkins Ordinary's annual production for on-site consumption, they have very little, they have little off-site sales, but not to the extent that the Venice people are considering here. But Hopkins is producing between 90 and 100 barrels a year. And Hopkins parking is, frankly, it's not ideal, but I will admit that I go there and there's parking and it works. And so if that works and the two breweries are basically on the same scale, then I'm trying to just make a reasoned and objective judgment, absent some calculation from Racy Engineering, how they came up with 21 parking spots and how they know that's enough. The other things we have to consider is what is the scale of this operation and what other benchmarks do we have? And we have a benchmark right across the street that seems to work without causing any problems. So I mean, I agree with Mr. Light, it is concerning, the location is concerning to me, especially in 211, Hopkins Ordering has a benefit of having its main entrance off of Main Street in Sperryville, which obviously is not like 211 in terms of volume and speed of traffic. So it's not a complete apples to apples comparison, but it seems, from what I've been able to discern through the answers to my questions, it seems that the scale here is not dissimilar to Hopkins Ordinary. So I don't want to be arbitrary in saying, well, this just doesn't seem right, or the parking doesn't seem sufficient. I think we have to think it through. If the response from Mr. Chapman is correct, that there's no room for additional parking, either this works or it doesn't. It's sort of a black and white decision for us to make. But I think it would behoove all of us to think about it, and perhaps we could do that during the interim period between now and public hearing.
Thank you for that, Mr. Whitson, but could I ask you to clarify, because you're benchmarking this against Hopkins Ordinary, and it seems like I think you've analyzed this production question a bit, and I know there's some flexibility in terms of total capacity and intentions for what's on-site or off-site, but it struck me that the better point of reference here is Penn Druid as a benchmark for what we could expect. Why are you saying it's closer to Hopkins Ordinary?
Well, why are you saying that Penn Druid is a better benchmark? Because of the 500?
Yeah, because of the capacity and the scale,
Right,
yeah.
right. So the Venice folks have bifurcated that per annum total into two subparts. One, on-site consumption, and then the remaining majority, and maybe I don't understand correctly, but it's primarily for distribution and some takeaway, I suppose, for lack of a better way to describe it. So what I believe I heard is that the production that they would have in taps in their brewery for people to drink on site is actually in line with, if not identical to, what Hopkins Ordinary does.
Thank you for that clarification. Thank you for that.
Which is 100. That's why I was asking for them to differentiate between on and off site. And I think Penn Druid actually is different because Penn Druid has very little distribution, very little.
Well, I appreciate that, and I guess I heard that slightly differently. I heard the expectation is maybe 100 on-site and 500. I didn't hear that specified in terms of a limit. So I guess maybe it's the distinction between your take and mine is the difference between a statement of expectations based on business concerns and an actual limit. So I don't think I saw it in any of the application materials, but I'd be glad to be proven otherwise, that there was any kind of limit.
I mean, my simple question is, how much are they going to produce for people to drink on this spot? And for me, that's the relevant benchmark. And I think we have to understand that, and perhaps that becomes a condition of permitting if we went that route. But in my opinion, 500 barrels a year for people to drink there suggests a much bigger operation. And to me, and I was there present at the beginning for both Penn Druid and Hopkins Ordinary as a member of the Rappahannock County Water and Sewer Authority, and Mr. Sharp was too. And so I feel like we do have to take into account, or at least consider, scale. And I believe that if the scale of their operations for on-site consumption are in line with a brewery nearby, that works, and that has an identical number of parking spots, then in my view, it could be discriminatory to single out someone who is doing potentially exactly what someone else is already doing that is occurring with little adverse effect on the community. And I'm not saying that I'm sold on this. I'm just trying to look at it dispassionately and objectively. So maybe I'm mishearing the numbers, and I'm here remote. So if they want to enlighten me and others separate from this meeting on what their plan is for on-site production, for on-site consumption, to me, that's a pretty important benchmark.
Thank you for that clarification. I totally agree. I do think what seems clear, the only thing that seems to be a real constraint here is their production capacity, and that is the basis on which it seemed to me that perhaps Penn Druid was a closer benchmark. But I take your point, and I think I heard the numbers the same as you did, but I didn't hear that that there was anything other than the response to whatever the market is that was going to ultimately define this. So if I've misinterpreted that, I'd be glad to hear otherwise. But I heard this in terms of what the expectation is based on projected market, and that's not, to me, a basis for public safety decisions.
Yeah, fair enough. Yeah, no, I mean, I think that I really believe that we have to understand exactly what the maximum contemplated production capacity for on-site consumption will be. That's an important number because that drives everything else. I mean,
Yeah.
It really does, because if you're sitting on a lot of inventory, and regardless of the size of your building, you can have people standing in your yard. You could potentially have people standing in your parking lot. You could have people standing out by the road. So I think I would like to lock in, at least in my mind, a sense of the real scale of what they're considering doing on that property, vis-a-vis on-site consumption of their product. I think it's critical for us to know that.
If I can
Thank you.
add, Mr. Randall?
Brian?
So, yes, thank you for the questions. They are great questions, and we hadn't really thought about providing those answers. So the distribution is what we're hoping. We're working with distributors right now for each of the different beers. There's a 10 BLL for a month that we are working with. So that's 10. 10 barrels a month. So if we wanted to sell maybe 4 different beers, for example, so it'd be 10 barrels a month for each of those 4 to simply distribute. So that's 40 barrels being distributed a month. So it's going to end up being 480 barrels directly giving to distributors. So you're talking about what's left in-house is only 20 for the tap room, which is really what we're talking about. It's a very small enterprise. We're not going to have enough beer, honestly, for the tap room if it gets too popular, because we would have already committed those to being distributed. So yeah, as was mentioned, our goal is to sell at least 4 different kinds of beers per month to the distributors, which would come up to, again, 480 barrels that is already committed, leaving us with just that remaining number.
Hey, that gives me a question.
Please.
What kind of truck picks up these shipments?
16 cube.
Good question.
So a flat truck or a tractor and trailer or what?
16 cube truck.
A box truck?
Well, there are actually 2 different individuals that come. There's a truck for bringing the cans and the bottles. And of course, there's a machine that will basically bottle them and then put them on pallets and then stack them for distribution. There's another truck that would come. It kind of looks like a moving truck, to be honest with you, roughly that size, and it's got a lift on the back. And so what they do is they bring the pallets that are full to the truck and then enter them into the truck, if that makes sense.
Where does the truck park on this?
Can I come up and show you? The truck would probably come in and back into this general area here.
There's
There's a little bit of a design
Well,
error here. This is gonna be extended back towards this way. And there's going to be a loading dock just here in the back. So the truck would pull up into this area, back in, and then the loading dock is where they would put their product onto the trucks.
Okay.
Well, I'm going to go ahead, unless, we can have more discussion, I'm going to go ahead and make a motion that we move this to our next public hearing. I think there are a number of questions for me, certainly, that are remaining, and I know the applicants have heard a lot of it. I think clarifying, even when you say distribution and you say, you'll have some on tap, but people will be coming up to buy it as well as sitting there and drinking it. So clarifying capacity, clarifying the actual number of parking, and things such as, if you're going to use that for commercial trucks, where are the employees' cars going to go? Just the whole question of that is, I think, going to come up. So, but I'll go ahead and move this to a public hearing for our next meeting.
I'll second that.
Thank you. I think we have a motion that's been moved and seconded. In the spirit of discussion, I would say that you just added consideration about trucks backing off 211 to this area as an area of some concern. So I think we have a motion duly made and seconded. Any further discussion? Mr. Keir, did I hear you trying to get in, or maybe you were just going to second?
Yeah, I'm good, thank you.
I'm sorry, Mr. Whitson, not Mr. Keir.
Oh, come on, Mr. Gary, that's all right.
I'm rusty at this. Any further discussion? If not, I would ask that all those in favor signify by saying aye.
Aye.
Aye. Any opposed? Well, thank you very much. We appreciate your indulgence and look forward to a public hearing at our next regularly scheduled Planning Commission meeting, the date of which maybe you know.
We'll let you know.
We'll let you know. Let's see, where are we? Public hearing, yes. The next item on the agenda is a public hearing on special use permit number 21-03-01, the Burgers Sonnet LLC Custom Sawmill, on tax map 18-49A. Ms. Summers, do you have an intro?
I believe she's unmuted.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Can everybody hear me?
Yes.
Okay, thank you. The Sonic is proposing a custom sawmill on their property located at 850 Harris Hollow Road for 17036G. The property is 166 acres in size. The sawmill is portable. They will saw logs harvested from their property. More valuable logs will be brought onto the property to be custom milled. The applicants have indicated that the proposed use will have little impact beyond the current by-right farm and residential uses. It is anticipated that the retail customers will rarely visit the property. The estimated average additional trips generated by the proposed special use permit will not exceed 1 to 2 daily trips beyond those trips already generated from their by-right use. Farm vehicles and equipment and/or vehicles with GVWR of 26,000 pounds or less will be used under the CDL required weight. No logging trucks will be used in conjunction with this. Family members along with employees will be on an as-needed basis. The applicants currently have a forestry plan and plan to focus on sustaining the timber on the property. PDOT has indicated through email that with their conversations with the owners that they felt the insurance was acceptable. At some point in the future, they may cut a log tree for a couple of friends, but not actually running a lumber yard. If that was the case, they had no issues. The health department had been contacted for comments, but no comments have been received. Staff has recommended 4 conditions that were attached to the staff report as well.
Ms. Sonnet is available on Zoom, representing the applicant.
Thank you, Ms. Summers. I'm pulling up the staff report to look at those conditions. Great, thank you. I believe this is in Mr. Henry's district, and he is not here. Yes, would the applicant like to add anything? I'm sorry, Ms. Sonnet.
You should be unmuted and able to speak.
Can you hear me?
Yes, we can.
Okay, all right. I have just a brief statement to give, and other than that, I think what you have in front of you is the bulk of what we're submitting. I just want to thank the commission for considering the application for the custom sawmill use, and want to add that our tree farm is located in the agricultural and conservation zoning districts. We've provided 2 feasibility statements, which we believe address all the potential impacts of the proposed use, and which we believe will be minimal beyond the currently permitted uses of the property. In addition to the performance standards contained in the zoning ordinance, and that's 170-53A and 170-68A, we accept all of the conditions proposed by the zoning administrator in the staff report, including the prohibition of logging trucks as recommended by, I believe it was Al Henry, or perhaps it was Gary, during the March 16 hearing. And we ask that the commission recommend approval of the special use permit application without placing any additional conditions on the permit, which we think would be more of a solution in search of a problem. And that's it. Thank you.
Thank you. I'll turn to my colleagues here. Would anyone like to advance something on this application? Actually, I guess this is a public hearing, so sorry. Again, I'm a little bit rusty. So why don't I, with that, open the public hearing. Is there anyone who would like to speak related to this? If you would, I'd ask that you come forward to the microphone, identify yourself and your district, and we don't have large numbers. Let's try to keep the discussion to no more than 5 minutes. Does anyone like to speak? Yes, ma'am.
Deborah Nick, Hampton District. I live at 846 Harris Hollow Road. I share an entrance with the address of the proposed sawmill or portable sawmill. And I've got a couple concerns. One is about subleasing, if that's allowed for this applicant. I would hope not. I know their intentions, but I'm afraid that it could be subleased to someone with higher aspirations than theirs. I'm also concerned about the noise. We live in a hollow. Noise travels. It bounces from one side to the other. I live downstream, and we hear equipment running now. Likewise, I'm sure they can probably hear, my weed eater and leaf blower and so forth. I'm also concerned with the hours of operations and the days. It was 7 to 7, but no specific days. So is this every daylight hour of every day that I'm going to hear sawmills? So I'm concerned with that. I'm also concerned with retail signs. I'm already seeing on 211 portable sawmill signs. So I would hope that that would be addressed, whether it be temporary signs that are removable or permanent. I'm also concerned with, on one of the documents I read, where employees could be up to 5 employees. If I'm doing the math right, an employee going in and out, unless they're carpooling, is an extra 10 trips through a stream that they already crossed. There's no bridge. They forge the stream, which already has use. And the only other thing I would mention is, you know, the monitoring. Who monitors this? The restrictions that this commission puts on gets policed or monitored by the neighbors. And I think that's an undue burden. Thank you.
Thank you. Is there anyone else who would like to speak? Yes.
Hi, I'm Evan Childress. I live on the other side at 866 Harris Hollow. And we are reasonably comfortable with this. We can hear the sawmill when it operates from our house inside with the windows closed. However, based on what they are talking about of relatively light use, we're comfortable with that. That is not what is permitted if you issue this permit. So we do have some concerns about that. You know, 7 to 7, 7 days a week is different than what they're talking about. And we're comfortable with what they're talking about. We don't want to stand in the way of what they're talking about. But I did want to express that concern that the scale that's under discussion and that I'm comfortable with is different than what would be allowable. And you know, and to some extent, I trust them and want to allow this good use of their land. And on the other hand, I'm a little bit concerned about a slippery slope of, you know, what if it really works? So that's all I have to say. Thanks.
Thank you, Mr. Childress. Would anyone else like to speak on this application?
There are some people on Zoom who have raised their
Sure, let's go to them. You want to navigate that, Mr. Curry?
If there's anybody on Zoom who'd like to speak as part of the public hearing, you can raise your hand. Directions are on your screen. And if you raise your hand, actually you can go ahead and unmute yourself and provide your comment. Not seeing any sort of.
All right, any other public comments? Last call. If not, I will hereby close the public hearing on this application and turn to my fellow commissioners.
Well, I'll make a comment, and that
Please.
is that several years ago, there was pretty aggressive opposition to a B&B on this road, that the potential traffic that would create, and from neighbors on the road, and this would be significantly more traffic than that would ever create, with some trucks, employees, and the like coming in and out. So I think that there may be some public opposition to this based on that. The sublease is a good question. I don't know, that would be something that might be addressed in a permit. I think that the operation into the night, as I recall, there was a clause that would allow loading and unloading of trucks until midnight. And that seems awfully late to me for the neighbors to be subjected to lights and noise and the like. I don't know about crossing the stream. I don't recall how that stream is set up there. The road goes through the stream. I don't remember that, but that might be an issue. And I think that we certainly want to limit the hours more than is proposed.
Thank you, Mr. Kohler. And could I ask if folks online who aren't trying to speak could mute themselves, or maybe Mr. Curry, you can mute. We are getting some background noise from online. Anyone else on the commission like to?
Well, I do have
Please.
a question. Okay, so if somebody were just harvesting off of their own property with a portable sawmill, I'm assuming they would not need a permit?
I think that is a correct assumption.
So really what we're looking at here is someone who wants to handle logs that belong to other people that are not
That is
from the
my
property.
interpretation,
Right.
that is the driver for the request for this permit.
And I think ultimately it boils down to the commercial aspect of the operation.
Right, okay, so,
The non-agricultural, commercial aspect. I think you can cut your own logs down and sell them to somebody, that happens all the time. But when you try to saw big logs into little logs and then into boards, as a commercial enterprise, that's different.
but if you're bringing big logs in from other properties.
That's even more different.
That's more different. Okay. So, and a portable sawmill is not a permanent setup.
This is a permanent permit, so,
No, not necessarily.
okay.
But, so a portable sawmill is not a building, and it has its own engine, so it can be picked up and moved. So
True.
that's what I'm wondering is, can it be somehow made to more conform to that style, which is not a permanent setup? Because I think,
So I just want to read the definition for sawmill custom, which, as the applicant stated in the last meeting, it's not exactly what they had in mind, but it's the only category that
Right.
is available, and that is a mill in which most of the product is sawed for retail sales and does not employ more than 5 persons in the on-site operations. That's the definition. If a permit were granted for a sawmill custom without any conditions, that would be the constraint on their use. And the conditions that are suggested by the planning commission and ultimately issued by the granting body could constrict that based on the appropriateness of a particular site, this being one such site that may be approved.
Does that answer your question, Mr. Sharp?
yeah, sure, for now, yeah.
I have some questions, but Mr. Whitson is on the phone, and although he's not technically the representative from this district, I believe it is in his district, so I don't know, Mr. Whitson, would you like to go first, or?
Sure. Thank you. Obviously, I know the applicant and I know the neighbors, and I'm familiar with the situation Mr. Kohler described. I'm not sure how that's relevant to this, but in any event, because I know the applicant, I was a little, I don't want to say confused, but I was trying to bridge a gap between their application for this special use permit and what I thought or assumed they really were intending to do. And what I had hoped was that the applicant could clarify with some specificity, and I think they've done a fairly good job with that since our last meeting, clarify with some specificity precisely what they are intending to do. And I see Mr. Curry has pulled up this clarification letter. So you have this definition or zoning ordinance for custom sawmill on the one hand, and then you have the applicant who, in discussions with the applicant and reviewing this statement that Mr. Curry's pulled up, I think are really contemplating what is essentially a hobby type operation. So thinking about bridging the gap between that somewhat broad and perhaps not specific definition of what a custom sawmill is, and recognizing that whatever their contemplated plan is doesn't fit into that definition precisely. I do think the bridging of that gap requires conditions, and I fully respect Ms. Simon's request that we don't impose any other conditions, but I will note that it is a street crossing that allows access into the portion of the property where this would be located. I will note that there are neighbors on both sides, and you've heard from both of them. And so, to me, the likely path forward here, if we were to recommend this to the Board of Zoning Appeals with a recommendation for approval, would definitely, in my view, have to be premised on a very strict limitation on the hours of operation to ensure minimum adverse effect on either neighbor on the other side of the property. I'm a neighbor down the road, so I would not be affected by anything other than truck traffic. I'm just concerned about noise and machinery. And frankly, I do agree the stream crossing issue is not insignificant because there is no bridge there. So it means, potential traffic through the stream bed. So, just if we get to a point where we make some motion, and one of us makes a motion tonight, I would just say for discussion that I would hope we would limit, place a condition where the operations would be limited to weekdays between, for example, 10 a.m. and 4 p.m. Because I think that would go a long way in allowing what I believe, from a scale perspective, is a hobby type operation that might be blown a bit out of proportion because of this somewhat broad, imprecise definition of a custom sawmill. And in the process, we would protect the neighbors from having their lives disturbed by constant noise, and perhaps some additional conditions about trips per day by any kind of vehicles that would be dropping off logs or pulling them out of there. And I believe that any traffic would also have to be limited to a very strict time frame on weekdays only. So that's kind of where I'm headed in my thinking, just trying to navigate this and accommodate what I think the applicants are trying to do, and also with the understanding that there are neighbors living right on either side of where the custom sawmill would go. So I just put that out there for you all to mull this over.
And that brings a thought to my mind.
Please.
What if it was just granted for a period of 3 years?
Or a year even.
Well, I mean, it may be more than a year, but just a period of time. Then if it really proved to be inappropriate, then they'd just have to find another location. And maybe just instead of these things being permanent, like they could be, it would be a time that it just ended. And then they could reapply.
I mean, I think often we struggle with that because of the permanent infrastructure involved, but to your earlier point, in this case, we're talking about a mobile sawmill
Yes,
anyway,
you
so
can
there
just
really
go.
isn't an
Yeah.
infrastructure. So I think your line of thinking is reasonable and within our rights. I would note on the question of, to Mr. Keir's point, that item 2, the estimated average additional daily trips will not exceed 1 to 2 daily beyond those already generated from by right uses. I mean, that is certainly, again, an estimate provided on a basis of something unmeasurable, and therefore it is far from any kind of constraint. And I think the neighbors are duly concerned about what this actually is, and the notion of this getting approved as one thing and becoming another is, I think, a very important topic for us to consider.
If I may, Mr. Chairman.
Yes, this issue.
So I won't repeat what everybody said, because I think that's the obvious question is, we're given an application that's very, very much like we're not gonna do very much within, and then some additional conditions and, suggested, by our staff. I would say that, I think I would be inclined, I mean, it seems like there are 2 ways you could do this. Either, you can impose, we can create conditions, for them, for the applicant. I would say I'm not comfortable with the conditions that are, the level of conditions that are suggested, or the vagueness of the application. So, I mean, the other option is just to recommend against it. But I don't object, since they've tried to indicate what they want. So we can craft some. I would say that those would include, as others have said, hours of operation, which I would assume for a sawmill like this, you don't need to run, based on what they've said, you don't need to run 5 days a week. They're talking about a very minimal issue. So, a couple of days a week, again, they don't have to be long hours, maybe 8 hours. The time frame, I think, again, we're talking about, I think a sawmill is actually a pretty useful business to have in the county, and I wouldn't mind seeing it, but if there's concern about what the scope of this is gonna be, if you think, I would have said a year, you say 3, 2 years would be maybe a possibility. The neighbors have said no retail signs, I don't see why we couldn't add that in unless there's a problem with that. I guess we would just have to come up with a list of conditions that seem to fit what we think we're hearing from the applicant.
Thank you. We moved by motion, and so I think we're heading in that direction. I guess I would like to also discuss this retail question because we've talked about the operation of the mill and the noise with that and the traffic, but I believe that this use would also allow retail lumber buyers to come on the site as it exists now. So there's been no discussion of that, and it strikes me that is also something that is left unaddressed in the applicant, but is another possible unintended activity because obviously this operation, once you saw and produced the logs, you've got to sell them to somebody, and so I think that's another consideration that we haven't addressed.
Actually, that brings up a question for Wendy. Where would the finished product be stored?
Ms. Sana, I don't know if you heard that question, but would you mind addressing it if you did?
Sure. The vision that we have for this is there would virtually be no storing. The lumber would be produced to specifications and would then be delivered or picked up, and there's nothing that's going to be prefabbed waiting for a buyer. It would simply be a job that had been commissioned, processed, and then presented.
Okay.
Thank you for that clarification.
Mr. Light, this is Kerry Woodson. Since we just posed a question, so Ms. Sana, would you mind if I just pose a question directly to her?
Please.
Ms. Sana, my fundamental question is why did you apply for this permit? And I ask that question because it seems to me that there are plenty of people in Rappahannock County who have portable sawmills who operate them, period. And we don't know about them, we don't hear about them, they do it. So my question to you is why are we even hearing this application?
Thank you, Mr. Whitson, for that opening. That's actually, at this point, that's a question we're asking ourselves. We felt it was the right thing to do. We knew that this was a special use permit that was in the code, and even though it, by definition, it exceeds what we have in mind, it is the lowest standard. We're certainly not going for sawmill, commercial. So we wanted to do the right thing and put this to the commissioners. That's pretty much it. It's like I said, it's the definition as it stands is at a tier much higher than what we initially envisioned, but it is the least that the county offers in the way of permitting of this type. And therefore, that's what we applied for.
Is it a correct starting premise that your intention is effectively to do sort of, I know you characterize this as a commercial type operation, but it seems a lot of that is driven by the definition of the zoning ordinance for custom sawmill. I guess where I'm trying to go is, we have a definition, it seems to suggest a lot more commercial activity than I believe you are intending. And so, would you agree that absent any less kind of intensive definition for what you all are doing or would do, would you agree that, in fact, a series of conditions would be the way to define and potentially limit your operations in a way that would be respectful toward the neighbors, one of whom shares a driveway with the very entrance that leads to the area of the property where you would be processing logs? I know you said it in your opening remarks that you hope we would not impose any further conditions, but it's certainly difficult for me, as a member of the Board of Supervisors representing that district and knowing and representing all of you, to disregard the real fact that you would be bringing traffic and moving logs through the bottom of the driveway of another resident. And to that end, I'm hoping we can get somewhere where you all can do sort of a hobby scale type thing under relatively restrictive conditions, so that you all can, your sons in particular, can do their creative entrepreneurial work without turning it into big business. And I'm trying to just think through how we do that, and I just wanted to get your thoughts.
Okay.
Given that you said you hope we would send this through with no further conditions.
Right. Well, I understand how you're trying to marry these two different aspects, and I appreciate that. I understand, and I want to be respectful of our neighbors. We have great neighbors. We've had, Debbie's been our neighbor for her whole life. So we do not want to offend, and we do not want to inconvenience our neighbors. We are already a tree farm. We have harvested trees. We have cut them down. We have done things already that are noisy and in keeping with what we are allowed to do, and with the stipulations that are in the definition of the custom sawmill. We would absolutely keep to all of those. To impose further conditions to make sure that everyone is comfortable with this, I understand. If, without sawing on the weekends, for example, I mean, if we were a tree farm, if we were cutting in our tree farm capacity, we could potentially be doing it 7 days a week. But I understand what you're saying, and I would certainly entertain whatever further restrictions you would want to put on us. And then just, I did want to say, I appreciate what Alex said about a kind of a conditional situation for a period of a year, and see how that works for everyone involved, with or without the further restrictions in place from the beginning, however you would deem appropriate. And then have you all reevaluate it, if that would be something you would consider.
Yeah, I think with the level of our county staff, I think Mr. Sharp has a good thought there, and I think it would be good for you all and good for your neighbors as well to know that effectively it's a trial period, because then that we're all forced to revisit this, whether or not there was sort of ongoing monitoring of the activities. And let's face it, I live down the road from you, and your neighbors live adjacent to you, so it's, whatever you all do won't be a mystery to anyone. We know that from our community, how small it is. So, yeah, I think that Mr. Sharp has posed a sensible condition. I appreciate what you said about a tree farm and 7-day-a-week activity, but no doubt, I really think that it would go a long way if you would agree that your sawmill activity be limited to weekdays and to sort of core hours during the business day. And if that is too limiting, then you should say so. I don't know when your sons work or if that would curtail their ability to actually operate the sawmill, but it seems to me that would be also a sensible condition that for whatever trial period we agree to would at least allow us to constrain the operations to an extent that should mitigate any adverse effect on the neighbors. So
I agreed, yes.
I could augment what I
Please.
said a little bit. I've noticed over the years, we being, well, I guess Planning Commission and/or Board of Zoning Appeals, attempt to put conditions on things to try to somehow make a use that might threaten somebody's way of life or whatever. We try to make it so it accommodates the people. But we're up here, and in how many minutes are we able to come up with all these conditions that may or may not really help the situation? Because, you know, we're not good at predicting the future. The future is predicted by how they actually do the business. And it may or may not be beneficial to not have them sawing at all on weekends. That may not matter. But I do think that if you have a period of time, and if it works, fine, and maybe more conditions could be understood and put on. If it doesn't work, then I think they would need to find somewhere else to do it. And I think, I'm not sure how we can come up with all these conditions. I think we could be here until midnight, you know, hashing out conditions that may or may not help.
Well, appreciate that sentiment. With all due respect, because we do so much in this county through special use and special exception, the only real constraint on that are those conditions and
Or the termination.
Well, the termination, though, we face the same issue in a year, you know, that if we don't have conditions that are binding in some way, then what's to say they do it one way for a year and we say, oh, it was fine for a year. And now we say, okay, it's okay to keep going,
Well,
and there's no conditions, and so we face the prospect then of it.
If you recall, I suggested 3 years.
Whatever the time period,
Okay.
the point is, you still reach a point where if there's not some kind of condition, the use could expand beyond that which was demonstrated in the trial period. And so, you know, I believe our tradition of adding these conditions is part of the responsibility of addressing these things through special use and special exception. And I think it's the mechanism that our code has set up for us to deal with these subtle differences in properties and the unique nature of these applications. So anyway.
I would say that, I mean, from my time so far on the planning commission, it seems in general, we do not try to craft conditions for the applicant. We ask the applicant to provide us with the conditions they're willing to live with, and then we kind of maybe tweak them a little bit, but say yes or no. But in this case, I think the applicant has indicated what their general use is, so I'm willing to take a quick stab and see if we can get there, and, you know, if people want to change it, they can. I won't make this as a motion just yet, but I will say they have agreed or specified in their application that there would be no trucks over 26,000 pounds. No idea what size truck that is, but that's what they put in there. There would be no logging trucks. So those things are probably easy. The neighbors have asked that we do no sublease and no retail signs, and those seem relatively straightforward things, at least for a limited special exception. Based on what the applicant has suggested, that what they want, perhaps we could impose conditions such as a maximum of 20 vehicle trips per week. That number could change, but a maximum of 5, and this would be relative to commercial logging operations only. This, what they do on their tree farm is what they do on their tree farm, but relative to commercial logging operations under this permit, a maximum of 20 vehicle trips per week, a maximum of 5 days per month, and a limit of 10 a.m. to 4 p.m. time frame. I'll throw that out.
Sorry, Ms. Ishii, 5 days per month, or did you mean 5 days per week?
No, I meant 5 days per month, and what I'm basing that on is that's commercial logging activity, which I'm assuming is different from what you could already do under your land use permit for your own trees. Maybe I'm wrong on that, but that's how I've understood this conversation.
And I'm sorry, what is it that you're limiting to 5 days per month? Basically the operation of the sawmill?
Commercial logging activity under the sawmill?
And we're not talking about logging, talking about sawing.
Excuse me, commercial sawmill activities. So as I've heard it distinguished here, and again, maybe others can correct me, that you cutting your own trees for your own use would not fall under that.
And my observation is it would seem to me that 20 vehicle trips per week would require a lot more than 5 days of sawing per month based on what I would imagine these trucks would be. So I think I respect and appreciate the starting point. I think we are getting into the challenges of nuance here, but I guess I'd be curious what others have said.
If you have 5 days per month, you may choose to do those all in 1 week. So that's why you would limit the vehicle trips per week under that theory.
Thank you for that.
I'm not sure how you can enforce that or pay attention to it.
Yes, Mr. Whitson?
Yeah, I was just gonna ask if Ms. Sonic could clarify what a 26,000 pound vehicle means.
That is,
It's our understanding that that's the limit at which you need a commercial driver's license. In other words, we would not be having that weight of truck, and we would not be having to hire or procure ourselves that kind of license, because we feel that it would be unneeded. We wouldn't be doing anything that large.
Let's cut to the chase. What kind of trucks are we talking about? I mean, what's gonna be going through the stream bed?
I envision it being mainly pickup trucks.
Okay, that helps.
And just like in preparation for this, just if you go to Wikipedia and you click on logging trucks, they're 80 to 88,000 gross vehicle weight. And that certainly is not going to be anything that's going to be used in conjunction with this sawmill.
a single axle logging truck would fit in under 26,000, or it could.
Okay, I was not aware of that.
Just a question, is a dump truck, a large dump truck, they can haul about 24,000 pounds or so?
Depends on what it's licensed for.
Yeah. Right.
Yeah, and I don't know how we navigate this. I'm really, basically, and where I'm headed is, if we limit this to certain days of the week and certain hours within those days and certain types of vehicles, and sort of a daily cap on the number of trips, we're effectively boxing you in. And I know that sounds like a pejorative phrase in here, but we do need to box this in, because I think a lot of the not the problem here, but a lot of the concern is and this isn't on you, it's by virtue of filing the application, it leads to the question of what are you ultimately going to do in the future? And I'm just trying to, we can't have, we honestly, I don't think would ever tolerate because of the shared driveway, neighbors, noise, et cetera. We never tolerate a full-blown commercial sawmill operation. I went and looked at that one. And this side, I told you, I went and looked at it. It's in a neighborhood, basically, near Amosville. It might be in Fauquier County. It's unbelievable. I mean, a logging truck's going through a neighborhood, like a subdivision. And you go back there, and it is a full-blown sawmill. Next to a house and next to a church. And how that ever happened, I don't know. But, you know, we don't, I think, you know, just truly cuts to the chase, what we don't want, and I don't think you're suggesting it, what we don't want and can't tolerate is a commercial logging and sawmill operation up in the hollow. I mean, that's where we're headed. So I'm just trying to figure out what kind of limitations would get us to a point where, and I'm sorry to say it this way again, but that would box you into such an extent that we all would have some reassurance about where you would go in the future at the maximum. Basically place a predictable cap on the level of your activity. And I don't, based on what I've heard from you and what I've read that you've provided, I don't think that that would preclude you from doing what I think you really want to do. And I really apologize for fretting and articulating all of this way, but it's just, we can't have a big commercial operation up there. So how do we end up in a position where you do what you all are going to do, and all the people up in the hollow can live with it? And I think weekdays, limited hours, small vehicles, and I don't think defining by weight helps anybody. I mean, I'm sitting here Googling what does a 26,000 pound vehicle look like? I mean, it gets me nowhere. So, and a stream crossing, and a shared driveway. There are tons of concerns here, but knowing your family, you know, you've got some creative children who are good at what they do. How can they do what they want to do without turning all upside down? So that's our job.
I will say we have a long agenda still ahead of us. It seems at some point we maybe should table this application and allow the applicant to come back if they want with information that gives us guidance on this, because to try to craft a bunch of conditions at 8:45 is probably going to be tough.
Right. I think the applicant, and Ms. Hannah, maybe you could, if any of what I said is meaningful or what the other members of the planning commission said is instructive, maybe you could just articulate bullet point form the conditions that would be acceptable to you all, so that we end up with conditions that effectively put us in a place where you're operating in the way you want, but it has zero adverse effect on the neighbors.
I guess I'd just like to interject and say that that's fine if we want to take that approach, but I do believe we're you know, a lot of counties refer to this type of request as a conditional use, and the whole point of our being here and deliberating this is to come up with the conditions that would make a use reasonable in the environment that it's in. So, I mean, I think we can go ahead and do that, but to me, we were on the right track as we're thinking about the conditions under which we feel we could be protective of the surrounding area. If we're not ready to do that tonight, I think we could table it, but I mean, of course it would be best if we were all comfortable and the Sonnets were happy, but I think our job here is to propose the conditions of the use that make it acceptable.
Okay, I'll propose some conditions. A one-year trial period, Monday through Friday, 10 a.m. to 10 a.m. to 4 p.m. only, including vehicular traffic and sawmill operations, and no subleasing of the custom sawmill. And if someone can help me with a way to define other than pounds, the type of vehicle that would be allowed to trips, I'd appreciate it. That's the one I can't quite wrap my arms around. But I think that that's a way for us to test this and a way for the applicant to use their sawmill, and it protects the neighbors.
And you had previously mentioned number of daily trips. I didn't hear that in the.
Yeah, I mean, no, I just wrapped that into what I can't actually resolve on the fly. So the vehicle question, how do we define what vehicles are allowed and how many trips can those vehicles make? I think that covers it, and we can move forward.
Ms. Sonnet, in I think her application information and staff report in the proposed request, references the 26,000 against the requirement for a commercial driver's license. And so rather than talking about pounds or whatever, you potentially reference that commercial driver's license. No vehicles that require a commercial driver's license.
Or you could, axles, I'm no truck expert, but is that a way to approach it?
I guess my suggestion is, I think to me, the truck condition is the hardest one. Number of trips per day is manageable.
There's no way to police that. I mean, so.
Well, there's no way to police it except that the neighbors are going to be faced with policing it anyway. And if it turns out to be 100 and we thought it was going to be 4, and we didn't say, we thought the limit should be 5, and the neighbors come back and say it's 100, we wouldn't have anything to stand on.
Fair point. So, if someone wants to put that out there, I'll give the others that are easy for me to define. So, weekdays only, 10 a.m. to 4 p.m., no subleasing.
I would suggest that we might.
No commercial signage also, that was raised, so, but I don't think they're gonna do that.
What about retail sales? It sounds like that was not the intent. Do we want to state that this is?
Yeah, no retail numbers,
No retail sales.
That's right, yeah.
So
I think that's.
what happens after this conditional period?
We would come back and I think what we would need to do is give this permit a duration.
Yeah.
Because I think we've dealt with this issue before, that if we review without any consequence, I think the point of the matter is we're putting a fixed term on the condition.
But I'm just suggesting more than a year, because it generally takes a while for a business to actually hit its stride.
Okay.
And you might have no activity for a year and then nothing to complain about.
Sure.
I would add that there's a time for the process to go through the application process.
Yeah.
So if you say 1 year in.
You gotta
8 months, you're gonna
reapply,
have to
yeah.
apply.
Yeah.
Right.
Can we change that to 2 years?
So why don't we say 2 years, and
Well, 3 is a nice number.
Well,
no, but the reason.
I wouldn't do more than 2.
sounds
The
like.
reason I'm saying that is still you need a little track record before, and also that gives them a period of time to give it a good trial.
Well, 2 years then also brings them back in case they want to expand it, and we're okay with it. So, I'm
Okay,
comfortable
that's
with 2. To me, the only gap here, and I would be comfortable with a truck trips per day or number, and I would be willing to punt on the truck size because that one to me.
How about only no more than 2 axles on the trucks?
All right, well, let's say 2 axle trucks, and is 5 truck trips per day a reasonable estimate? That's certain.
Your trips are gonna be equal because you're going in and out.
Okay, if we're counting, each way. Well, I was thinking 5 round, so do we want to say, Kier I mean, I think we're following your lead, but that's a lot.
Well, they're not that big.
It is a lot.
So
Does
6,
that include the workers?
I think we were talking about truck trips. You know, my thought is that's the critical element here. Yes,
I would say 2 round trips a day.
2 round trip delivery or removal trips,
Yeah, just 2 round trips a day.
2 round trips per
So
day.
that's 4
And
vehicle
honestly,
trips.
if we agree to spend a quarter, and if I understand the scale of this correctly, and that's probably consistent with
Okay.
what the client is.
Yes.
I know I've said too much already.
No, please.
And I am worried.
No, I think we're getting there.
Okay, so a question is, as soon as you have an operation which is a tree farm, is what it's being described as.
Yeah, but we're not talking
Hold
about the
on,
tree
hold
farm.
on, just- And so a tree farm isn't harvested all the time. They have a big harvest every 30 years or 20 years. And so how do you differentiate, once you put a sawmill on it, now you say, oh, wait, no, that truck was for the tree farm, that wasn't for the. See what
I
I'm
think
saying?
it's pretty
You
clear.
can't.
The trucks are either carrying logs that are brought in, or they're carrying logs that are been sawed and are carried out. You know, to me, you count the trips based on truck trips coming in, and there you have it.
Well, that's why also, if I may be so rude as to interrupt, that you can do vehicle trips per week, which I recall we've done on other applications such as the hunting, the firing range. We limited that to vehicle trips per week, if I'm not misremembering, which gives you some more leeway. So if your tree farm is coming in, you know, on a particular time, you know, you've got that leeway. That's one way to do it.
Yeah. Mr. Whitson?
I would just say if you have not, and this is no dig against the silence at all, but if you have not been up to the entrance to the property that will be used, let me just reiterate, it is the bottom of a driveway shared with Miss Nick, and there is no grade. The access is directly through the street. So just picture that, and then ask yourself about daily trips. We're not talking about a big road with a big steel bridge. We're talking about a shared driveway and a stream crossing. So, I mean, that's a big deal. And again, it's not a dig against the towns. I'm just trying to make sure that we're taking into account the fact that it's not an ideal setup. They have a little sawmill, they want to saw some logs, they've asked for a permit. So how do we condition the permit to such an extent that what they're doing makes sense for that place, which is not ideal?
Yep, I think we're almost there. And I guess the question is, there's 2 things on the table. One is some number of perhaps 2 truck, trips per day for the commercial logging operation. There's been a suggestion that we do it on trips per week. I do think the way to address that is on somehow a number of trips limit. So, Mr. Whitson, I think you're closest to this. So, are you more comfortable with the 2 trips per day? I mean, frankly, neither of these seem that they would be at all constraining based on what we've been told the intention is.
Yeah, I would say 2 round trips per day, 10 a.m. to 4 p.m. And I'm still not totally comfortable with the truck thing. I mean, 2 axles, I suppose, but it's a stream crossing, so like I said, keep that in mind. If somebody can figure out the vehicle definition, I don't know that commercial driver's license. I mean, I don't know that that's the way to go about it.
I think 2-axle, it seems to me that 2-axle is more what we're.
2-axle non-commercial vehicles.
Why don't you use a ton and a half, that's what it is.
All right.
Now, what I'd say is sometimes people will pull a trailer with a pickup truck, so I guess that's.
That's 3 axles.
Yeah,
Or could be 4.
I'm trying to document.
please.
I'm sure Marlene has too. These 2 round trips per day of 2 axle trucks, is that intended for logs in and lumber out and not related to workers or
Right, yeah.
owners? Wonder if it's,
Think,
because logs, if logs are leaving, it's timber.
So that's,
So it's logs into the site by somebody else who wants them to cut the logs for them, or lumber that's been cut leaving the site. Is that correct?
I would just say two wood-related round trips per day.
that would allow either two deliveries or two pickups, or one delivery and a pickup on a given
You
day.
just can't constrain them cutting down trees and all that.
Right, right. I mean, I think what we're really trying to zero in on here is the commercial logging operation, and that is the operation that is Sawmill. Now I'm doing it on lumber brought in from offsite.
Logs brought, lumber brought.
Sorry.
Can I make a suggestion at this point that the applicant has heard in great detail where we're headed on this, but again, if we table this and the applicant can take this back and review that, and if that's what the applicant wants to apply for, let them apply for it, rather than us imposing conditions that may or may not reflect where the applicant.
I feel like we're 99% there. I hate to start all over again for the additional one. If we can reach a point where we can have a motion and a second and have it get the votes required.
And let me say, the applicant is going to have the opportunity to digest this recommendation, and then provide information to the BZA as to whether the recommendation suits their needs or doesn't, and petition the BZA for some other potential conditions that may adjust these slightly, and the BZA will have to take that into consideration. So,
Yeah, thank you for that.
Clarification, is this BCA or?
BCA.
I thought this was special exception.
use permit.
Oh, I thought this was, okay.
Mr. Whitson, I believe the motion that is in the works is coming from you. Would you like to finish it off?
Sure. I would move that we recommend this special use permit application to the Board of Zoning Appeals for approval with the following conditions. And Mr. Curry, you can catch me up if I miss any of these. One, operations of the custom sawmill limited to Monday through Friday from 10 a.m. to 4 p.m. Number two, no subleasing of the custom sawmill to any third party. Three, a maximum wood-related round-trip vehicle trips of no more than 2 per day. And I apologize, I should have been taking notes as I went. Mr. Curry, what did I miss?
I'd be happy to read the list that you read earlier. 2-year trial term.
Yeah, that's the big one.
But that's a
Monday through Friday,
two,
10 to 4, no sublease, no commercial signage, no retail sales from the site, and however you're gonna phrase the trips, I have 2 round trips per day, 2 axle trucks, logs in or lumber out.
and just to clarify, the trial term means it ends at
It
the.
ends.
Yes,
Yeah, okay.
a 2-year term.
Okay.
And instead of 2 axle, there has been a suggestion of half-ton.
I think we
1.5
should stay away
ton.
from the truck description. None of us seem to know a damn thing about trucks.
We have another permit that tried to get into 2-ton trucks. It is undefined.
The one I Googled looked perfect. It doesn't look enormous. I mean, I don't know what you all saw. mean,
I believe we
twice a
have-
day coming in.
Yeah. Mr. Whitson, are you comfortable with your motion as stated, or would you like to modify it?
So my motion would be to recommend the special use permit application to the Board of Zoning Appeals with a recommendation for approval incorporating by reference the conditions that Mr. Curry just summarized. And that would be the motion.
Great.
And let me just add that I do have significant concerns about the location of this, and I think that it is important to remember, as Mr. Curry articulated, that one, the applicant will have to consider whether these conditions are workable, and two, the Board of Zoning Appeals will hear it and they'll have their own public hearing. So I just want to emphasize that this recommendation for approval is with some reservation, but I do think that what the limitations we put on it get us to a point where the operation is defined in such a way that it potentially would have little adverse effect on any neighbors.
Great, thank you very much. I believe we have a motion on the table. Is there a second?
I will second.
Any further discussion?
Yes.
It was.
I think we should leave the truck business out of it. 2 trips is fine, but counting axles and looking at weight. I'm surprised the VDOT didn't even look at the bridges, or did they?
They referred to the entrance, which I think is
Right.
what they were asked to do.
I don't believe VDOT made a site visit.
That's correct.
Okay, any other discussion? We have a motion duly made and seconded. If there's no further discussion, I think we should call a roll call vote.
Does Mr. Whitson have any desire to amend his motion on the truck issue?
Mr. Whitson?
No, I appreciate the comment. Was that Mr. Schulen?
Yes.
And Mr. Curry, what is the truck condition state right now?
2 axles.
Yeah, I mean, I think we have to, and Mr. Schulen, I absolutely appreciate what you're saying. So you have the question of bridges on Harris Hall Road itself. And as I've already said, there is no bridge. This is a stream crossing on their property. And so, in my mind, the vehicles that we would allow to even access the property have to be as small as possible to still allow the movement of logs and lumber. So that's kind of what I'm after, so I leave it in.
Okay.
But it certainly could be fleshed out further by the BZA if they are inclined to approve the application, if the applicant agrees that the conditions are workable.
Okay, thank you. So again, I believe we have a motion duly made and seconded. Any further discussion? Okay, I'll take a roll call vote. Mr. Schulen?
No.
Mr. Kohler?
Aye.
Ms. Ishii?
Aye.
Mr. Sharp?
Aye.
And I too will vote aye. Thank you very much. Oh, sorry, Mr. Whitson. Thank you very much. I know that was a challenge, and I guess next stop is the BZA.
Thank you all.
Thank you. I feel as though we could use a break, but I also feel that we have a public comment period, and I'm inclined for those who might have come with a public comment to maybe take the public comments before we take a break. Any objection to that on the part of the commissioners? Nope. Okay. So the next item on the agenda is our general public comment period. Similar request as before. If you would like to speak, please come forward, identify yourself, and keep your comments limited if you would, please. With that, is there anyone who would like to speak?
Yes, sir, Mr. Chairman, I would.
Thank you, Mr. Conn.
David Connick from Stonewall District. You know, the commission has just sat here for 2 hours on 2 special use or special exception permits. For one was a public hearing, one person got up and talked about it. The other one, I didn't see anybody that particularly said anything about it. And so maybe 4 or 5 or 10 people are affected. Meanwhile, you have on your agenda, finally, the issue that I've been campaigning for about 3 or 4 years now, that Mr. Parrish first raised in October of 2017, and that's the issue of solar farms in the county that has the potential to impact the county in a really major way, far beyond what these 2 applications and the people, I mean, it's important to them and I appreciate that, but these are things that affect the entire county and everybody in it and are of major importance all around us in Page County, Culpeper County, Fauquier County, And I could go on, the list goes on and on, you know it because you got letters from me starting 3 or 4 years ago about this. We finally could put the provisions into the comprehensive plan with very little debate, I might add. And then when it came up, after we got done with the comprehensive plan last August, in September, I prepared a draft of those provisions, exactly what's in the comp plan, that the comprehensive plan says should be considered as amendments to the zoning ordinance on a priority basis. Well, here it is, 6 months after the comprehensive plan has been adopted and has that in it. And finally, it's made it onto the agenda, and I hope you will get to it tonight. This is really important, and like I said in my letter to the commission of April 7, 2019, over 2 years ago, when is the commission going to finally do something about this? And why are we always walking around with our pants down around our ankles and not doing anything until there's a crisis? Well, now there's a crisis because somebody's on the verge of applying for a 400-acre solar farm in Rappahannock County, in Jackson District. So I wish that the commission would set some priorities. It's on the work plan, I think, that the commission adopted last July to get this done. And so it's finally on the agenda. I'm glad it's finally on the agenda. There's very little debate about it, I think. There's very little that maybe it needs to be tweaked a little bit, but it's basically ready to go. So I hope the commission will do it and do it promptly and maybe set it for a joint public hearing with the Board of Supervisors next month so that it can go forward, because this is of major concern to everybody in the county. Thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Connick. Would anyone else like to speak?
You do have somebody on Zoom.
Is that someone who has expressed interest? Yes. Or okay. Yeah. Yes, Mr. Nash.
Yes, this is John Nash, and I've listened to 2 hours that could have been condensed to 45 minutes, and I believe the Planning Commission is not doing its job, either not doing its homework or not doing its job. We have critical issues facing this county, and the Planning Commission is a parachute on all of them. I agree with David Connick on everything he said. Thank you.
Thank you. Is there anyone else who would like to speak? Yes, Mr. Fraser.
Excuse me, have to give me a minute, I'm a little bit stiff. Ron Fraser, Jackson District. I've given each one of you members, when you came in or left it at your seat, a proposal I have for the solar farm amendments. And as Mr. Connick mentioned, we worked on those when I was on the commission, both Mr. Connick and myself, in 2019. So there really shouldn't be much debate tonight about pushing those forward for public hearing. And I believe if you do that, schedule your public hearing for next month, it's quite possible the Board of Supervisors would schedule a joint public hearing. But we can't do that if you don't move yours forward. So we can try and get something on the books. I don't like the analogy Mr. Connick used, because it's this should be a family-oriented meeting. Anyway, I really hope that you will take it to heart and move these amendments on to a public hearing for next month. Now, if you could give me a second or two to look at what I proposed. The language that I put on the paper for you there is very similar to 17065G3, additional standards for travel trailer park. And what I propose would be, you could renumerate it any way you want to, but it's 170-64-5E. And that is, the road frontage requirement shall be 200 feet on a state-maintained road with a minimum paved width of 20 foot. That's what we have for travel trailer park. Then I have in italic, the entire length of travel from nearest intersecting state-maintained paved primary or secondary road. we had a discussion a year or so ago about travel trailer. If somebody just paved a 200-foot wide section of the road they're on, that may actually be sufficient according to our ordinance. But when you look at doing that on some of our roads in Rappahannock County, the back roads that are 14-foot wide in some points, that's crazy. If you want a 20-foot road section, it's only the section of the property that's in question, and then it narrows back down to a bottleneck of 14 foot somewhere, that doesn't really meet the intent. So I think that we need to say that we want it all the way out to the nearest intersection with another state-maintained road. Or otherwise a 20-foot is just it doesn't have any meaning. So I would like you to include this tonight in the package that you're going to recommend. I'm pretty sure it's hard for me to predict anything, especially the future. That's what Yogi Berra said, and I have the same problem. But I'm pretty sure you're going to do that right, because we've already done the work, everyone except Mr. Sharp. All of y'all here tonight, and Mr. Whitson, he wasn't on the commission then, but it's really straightforward. All the work's been done. Just pencil this in at the bottom there somewhere and recommend it for public hearing for next month, and I think everybody be happy. No, I would. So thank you very much.
Thank you, Mr. Frazier. Would anyone else care to speak? Anybody online?
I do not see any other hands raised.
Okay, with that, I will close the public comment period. And with all due respect, I'm sorry, I know it's getting late. I do want to keep plowing through the agenda, but I would also like to call for a 5-minute break. So please, if you will, we'll reconvene in 5 minutes. Are we back live online? All right, I'll call us back to order. Thank you very much. The next item on the agenda is the review of the renewable energy amendments to the zoning ordinance. I think we've had, in the public comment section, a pretty good introduction to this. I don't know, Mr. Curry or Ms. Summers, if you would like to tee this up in an additional manner.
Ms. Summers was online. I wasn't plugged into this process very much back in September when the Planning Commission reviewed it. It was on the agenda in September 2020. And now, I don't believe there was any action. It was provided as a preliminary draft at that time. And it's noted as a discussion draft. I have not reviewed it in detail, and don't believe the county attorney's reviewed it in detail. Though I do believe it tracks closely with what ultimately was adopted
In the comprehensive plan. Yeah, that's my recollection as well.
So, during the break, I expressed some concern of going too fast and advertising something that we find has an issue, which is what happened with the May amendments, and it caused us to stumble and actually take a couple months longer. I would like to make sure that we don't have that issue, particularly knowing that the May amendments have since been adopted, which have changed some things around in the ordinance. And we just need to make sure this feathers in precisely and does everything we want it to do. On the flip side, obviously, there's an interest and a concern that we need to get this done as soon as possible.
Thank you, Mr. Curry. Ms. Summers, did you have anything to add?
Can't
I
hear
just
you.
wanted to add that also this was drafted to be incorporated into the comprehensive plan. And I agree with Mr. Curry that we need to have the county attorney review this so we don't run into any issues before we take consideration for public hearing.
The one thing I will add is that I think the concept of a joint public hearing makes a lot of sense. Certainly would build that consensus. If there were any minor tweaks that could be done in keeping with whatever the advertisement is, and if the Planning Commission and the board saw fit to that, that could be built into your schedule. Have the staff review it. Of course, the Planning Commission, if you have input, now's the time. but have staff review it. For example, here's a blank, we need to at least fill that blank in when the lot size. Oh, that was for someone else. And then, after that month, then plan that joint public hearing the next month with a document that is very clearly red line, strike through, and precisely approved to be advertised.
Thank you, Mr. Curry. Before I turn it over, I guess I would just tee this up by saying I agree, and my sentiment on this is that we do need to move as quickly as we can with the appropriate level of review. I don't think what we have before us is ready to be noticed. I think, to me, the question before us tonight is, as a practical matter, how can we move this forward in such a manner as to get that hearing scheduled and give the staff the time required? To me, there's probably two elements here, or three. One is the one that you've mentioned, which is just feathering this and making sure that it fits into the structure of the code. The second is reconciling it, I think, more thoroughly. I think when we discussed this the last time, there was some question as to how it did or didn't comport with the latest statutes on this matter. And so I think a legal review is pretty critical. And I know in some of the discussions we've had on this technically that there's been some questioning and discomfort with our level of technical understanding about the request. So I think, in my mind, we have this language in the comprehensive plan already, and a better place to be would be with more or less that same language in the ordinance. And I do think we want to move quickly to that place, recognizing that we need to do enough to make sure that we don't make a mistake that would render our efforts useless in an attempt to kind of enforce any of these new requirements. So with that, I guess I'll open it up to commissioners if anyone wants to have a question or maybe consider moving this in some fashion. Please.
In 38 years, I've never asked to speak at a time like this in the planning commission. Would it be possible to just...
Please, I recognize you.
The people at home probably won't hear you.
Okay, well, that kind of makes it I'm just thinking, I mean, I wasn't here when, at the meeting a month or two ago, when the sign ordinance discussion was put off and they said the county attorney didn't have time to do something before July or whatever it was. This is more important than the sign ordinance as far as I'm concerned. And I really think without a time certain that we don't know, you know, you're talking about putting it off for technical review. Well, really, that should have happened, all right, but it didn't. So that's where we are. We're here now, and the county administrator is saying that it needs technical review. The zoning administrator says she thinks it needs it. It should have had it. It didn't. So you're going to have to look at a time certain to do this. So, you know, you can instruct the county attorney, but we've got to have some sort of a date certain. You've got to set a public hearing and or set a, or maybe what do you call it? Just recess this and continue the meeting or something so that we have a timeline that we are actually working on this, or it's not going to happen until July or August, and then it'll be essentially too late as far as I'm concerned.
Thank you.
So that's what I wanted to interject. You know, do something. Continue the meeting. Put some sort of a time certain. Put instead of a hesitancy, put an optimistic date on this thing that you're going to be looking at doing this at a time certain in the future.
Thank you.
If you would. Thank you.
Thank you. Anyone care to?
Yeah, I'll jump in. Thank you very much. Mr. Connick and Mr. Frazier on the importance of getting this moved forward. I will say that this is a highly technical area. There's under the code, there's a Virginia Electric Utility Regulation Act. There's a multifamily shared solar program. There's the permit by rule for small renewable energy projects. There's the renewable portfolio standard that was recently enacted. And I think there was good thought put into what we have in the comprehensive plan to the extent that we indicated we wanted to make it very protective of our county, but to write ordinance language, especially if you have individuals who have substantial pockets and want to do projects, it's very important to get this right and not waste time by putting language out there that's not going to do what we want and find that out after the fact. So I strongly agree with the need to move this forward quickly and to set a time certain, and to do so through a joint session with the board if they would be open to such a thing. But I do think that having staff review this closely, not just with our staff, but if we can very quickly through the Berkeley group or somebody we may already have a contract with and wouldn't have to go through some lengthy procurement situation, bring in a technical expert on this so that we get it right. Because I've written this kind of stuff before in past lives, and I know the devil is in the details, and I really would not want us to waste time getting it wrong. So sometimes, as my father used to say, the person who doesn't have time to do things right the first time always has time to redo it. Let's not put ourselves in that position would be my only suggestion.
Thank you, Ms. Ishii. Anyone else like to speak on this?
Sure, just here, Whitson. I don't want to go on too long. Last month, we were criticized for moving too quickly on special use permit applications, and all those were pretty much no-brainers based on the facts. And tonight we're criticized for spending too much time on special use permit applications, so I'll be quick. I agree with Mr. Frazier, moving forward. I agree with Ms. Ishii. We do have funds in the 21 fiscal year budget for outside legal or consulting help. I think what we need is not Berkeley group type help, but what we need probably is outside land use counsel with familiarity with this subject matter area. So Mr. Curry can perhaps instruct us on how to get that done, but I agree, and I've seen the email traffic, and regarding a possible project, I received a very oddball voicemail message. I believe other members of the Board of Supervisors received a similar message, very presumptuous, from who I think was the potential project manager, leaving a very vague message and insisting that I call that person back. So something is definitely up, and I appreciate Mr. Frazier's sense of urgency, and so let's just try to figure out how to move this along quickly, and let's retain outside land use counsel with familiarity with the subject area. So thank you, that's it.
I just looked at the calendar, just thrown out there. Next planning commission meeting is June 16th. And then the July Board of Supervisors meeting is July 7th. It's a Wednesday because of July 4th. There's a potential that you could have a joint public hearing on July 7th, which would make the ad dates July 1 and July 24, which would be followed June 6th. July 1 and June 24, which would follow the June 16th Planning Commission meeting. So work could happen between now and June 16th to scrub the draft, use whatever extra resources are necessary and available to us. Planning Commission could be comfortable with that draft on the 16th, goes into the paper for the 24th, 1st for a joint public hearing on the 7th.
Thank you, Mr. Curry. I mean, to me, what we're facing here is the fact that the Planning Commission is kind of in a different configuration, has kind of taken this as far as we could. I think the concepts that are represented in here, the policies, the protective nature, the priorities for what's protected, reflected then and probably still reflect our intention. But I think the concern is to get the legal review and the technical review, which I do think is beyond our jurisdiction. I think what you just outlined works for me. To me, the question is, what is the right path, the short path to get this done? I don't think we're, I personally haven't heard a single thing that suggests that this commission, wants to open this up further. I think it's just a question of cleaning up the language, getting the right review, and making sure that whatever we put forward is defensible. And I would just add that I personally have no opposition to Mr. Fraser's suggested addition. So to the extent that we can, move to adopt the timeline or recommend the timeline that Mr. Curry just put forward, I would be perfectly happy to entertain a motion to do that.
I'll make that motion. I move that we move this forward for a joint, for staff and legal and other technical advice to be done prior to the next Planning Commission meeting, and that it be, we move forward and ask the Board of Supervisors to have a joint meeting on July 7th after our June 15th meeting, with a July 1 and a June 24 and a July 1 ad to advertise it.
June 16th.
With, and to consider Mr. Fraser's language as well as an addendum to it, to the current language.
Thank you. Just one other point of clarity in addition to the correct date of the Planning Commission meeting being the 16th. I believe the joint meeting that we're talking about would be a public hearing on the matter. Is that part of this as well?
Correct, yes.
I think that would be consistent with what Mr. Curry outlined. Thank you, Mr. Kohler. We have a motion on the table. Is there a second?
I'll second.
Thank you, Mr. Whitson. Motion duly made and seconded. Any further discussion?
Is this the fastest way to get there?
I believe it's the fastest, safest way to get there, to ensure we have the product we need at the end of the day.
What's our current product?
The current product includes the general requirements in 170-52 for special exceptions, and which refer to the comprehensive plan, which is pretty robust now. So I don't believe it's quite fair to say your pants are down, but you could put suspenders as well as the belt.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Mr. Curry, this is Keir Whitson. From a legal review standpoint, do you have any thoughts in response to my suggestion and this issue's suggestion?
My thoughts are, don't bind my hands on who we're going to use, and that allow the most flexibility to get it done.
But you'll find a way and let us know what it's going to be.
Yes, and it's budgeted, it's within my budget authority, we can get it done.
Okay, thank you.
Any further discussion? If not, maybe we'll just call for a vote. All in favor? Aye.
Aye.
Any opposed?
That is your Keir's vote.
Mr. Whitson, how was your vote?
Aye. Aye.
Thank you. Mr. Schulin, did you vote aye as well?
Abstain.
Abstain, okay. So, thank you all very much. The next item on the agenda is the preliminary review of the special use permit number 210502, the Dowling Real Estate Blue Rock Inn Country Inn application. I believe counsel for the applicant has been patiently waiting for this opportunity. Michelle, would you please start us off from a staff perspective?
The Blue Rock Inn currently has two special exception permits, 8704-07 and 9210-02. They are now applying for a special use permit in accordance with the May amendment to replace their permit for a country inn. They wish to revise the previous conditions that were placed upon it. They would like to be authorized to have an administrative subdivision of the property, to reestablish the restaurant use, to reestablish and augment the number of overnight accommodations for guests, establish a tasting room and gift shop, and conduct a limited number of outdoor events on the property. The current permit for the property is to operate a lodge, resort accommodations for up to 10 rooms or overnight lodging and pavement facilities along with tennis courts. The permit included self-imposed conditions that permitted the Rappahannock County High School tennis team club to use the tennis courts, which were never actually constructed, and the cross-country team to utilize the perimeters of the property for practice. The permit also required all lighting in excess of 60 watts to be downshielded and not visible from adjacent properties, and that all music played outside of structures ceased at 10 p.m. And they restricted horseback riding activities to overnight guests. The applicant has requested authorization for an administrative division of the 79.56 acre parcel into 3 parcels. They wish for accommodations for up to 20 rooms, accommodating no more than 40 overnight guests. And then rather than operating in one overly large hotel-like structure, they proposed rooms would be accommodated in separate structures throughout the property, consisting of approximately 5 rooms, and then 5 rooms additional in the original building. They would be phasing this in over time as needed. The restaurant will be renovated and operated Thursday through Sunday initially, but later they hope to open 7 days a week. They also are asking for a tasting room and gift shop, which will be open from 11 a.m. to 10 p.m. The applicant does not have plans to reinstitute the existing polo room for events. Instead, they wish to engage and/or operate as a third-party operator to accommodate guests for horseback riding and related equestrian activities on the property. They also plan to relocate the existing cottage currently on the property, and it will only be used as a residence, not for the inn. They also wish to hold events on the property, which they expect no more than 200 guests. There are proposed conditions, and I will turn over to Mike Brown to finish anything I didn't explain.
Thank you. Mr. Brown, would you like to supplement any of that?
Mr. Dowling had been on the Zoom meeting, but he had to get off at about 9:30. He urged me to proffer that there would be no sawmill use on this property whatsoever. Hopefully that will help.
Thank you. We've got that.
I believe I heard everything accurately that Ms. Summers summarized. That is all, in fact, correct. One issue that was not mentioned in the staff report that's in your materials that came up very late in the day today was whether the application should, in fact, be filed as a country inn retreat lodge, which is the way we styled it in our initial application, or whether it would be better or more accurate in some way to treat it as a conference center / resort use. I've spoken with Mr. Dowling, and he has no objection at all to amending the treatment of this application to fall within the conference center category. The additional standards in 170-65 are almost the same. In fact, there are a couple that apply to country inns that don't apply to conference center uses. So that would be an acceptable proposal to us, and it has maybe the added benefit of going to the Board of Supervisors, obviously as a special exception permit, rather than going to the BZA. The reason I say the benefit is because the original applications that resulted in the current special permits in effect for this property were in fact special exception permits. So some of the limitations that were in those permits, of course, were imposed by the Board of Supervisors. So there are some. It makes some sense to have this maybe go back to the Board of Supervisors rather than to the BZA, which it would under the most recent amendments. So that's I don't know that I need to make a sort of a formal request that it be amended, but we're fine with it being treated that way.
Thank you.
Let me just clarify on the conversations that happened today, and that would it's really my fault, as I was preparing to sit here, knowing Michelle was going to be at home and I might be called on the carpet, I wanted to make sure I read everything very carefully. Of course, I'm intimately familiar with the zoning ordinance, but every time you read it, you learn just a little bit more. In reading the two definitions for a country inn, retreat, or lodge, the definition is essentially the same as conference center or resort, with one minor difference. And the country inn states a use which provides temporary lodging, meals, entertainment, recreation, and etc. for up to 40 persons in a rural setting. And a conference center or resort is a use that provides temporary lodging, meals, entertainment, recreation, etc. for more than 40 persons. And so that series of uses, lodging, meals, entertainment, recreation, etc., they're requesting events for up to 200 people. And that 200 is more than 40. Spoke with the county attorney about it, and he felt, as I did, that that would push this into the conference center resort category as opposed to the country inn. But as Mr. Brown stated, the special conditions are essentially the same. Actually, they drop a couple conditions in the conference center. The setbacks are a little bit different. But we think it's more appropriate because of the 200 people in the events. Now, if the applicant wanted to have only 40 people in their events, we believe it would be a country inn.
Thank you for that clarification. Did you have anything else? If not, we'll certainly come to you with questions.
No, we'll leave it at that. Thank you, Mr. Lane.
Thank you. And Mr. Curry, did you have anything else? So I guess I'd like to start with one of the questions that arose earlier today about the administrative request for administrative subdivision. I believe Mr. Henry raised an important question about the history of subdivision and whether those subdivision rights still existed based on subdivisions that have taken place since the enactment of the ordinance. Has that question been resolved?
So, the special exception from 92, which I'll pull up, include, or is it from 87? I'm sorry, it's the old one.
It's the 92 permit.
I just can't.
Yeah.
Up there we go.
Yeah.
That's it. Any subdivision of this parcel in the future must be approved as a modification of this permit. So what the applicant is requesting is essentially to get rid of this permit and issue a new permit that doesn't have that restriction. They still need to pass any hurdle that would be required for an administrative subdivision if one is appropriate. And those will be reviewed based on the densities that are in place, what the parent parcel was at whatever date, and so they either are allowed to do that or not. The question is whether should be a restriction on the permit that would preclude them from doing it if they were in fact actually allowed to do it. And I'm sure Mr. Brown would parse those requirements and provide a very compelling case to the subdivision agent to say that they can. But it is what it is at the end of the day. It's whether there should be a restriction or a condition in the permit that disallows them that opportunity.
Thank you for that clarification. That's very helpful. I'm going to just restate it to make sure I understand it and perhaps for the benefit of others. So we're not in a position today to approve a subdivision. We're in a position to allow consideration of a future subdivision under the terms of this permit.
Right. The subdivision is allowed by the ordinance as defined in the subdivision ordinance now and the zoning ordinance for densities, and they're not eligible for consideration right now because of the condition on the earlier permit. And if that condition were removed by issuing this new permit to replace all that, then they could seek that administrative permit just like any other landowner could.
Thank you. Ms. Ishii, am I correct that this is in your district? No?
This is not in my district. I
But-
believe it's in Mr. Henry's, maybe?
Okay. Well, would anyone like to speak or ask a question of the applicant or Mr. Curry, or maybe make a motion?
This is Gary Woods. It's as a member of the Board of Supervisors, this is located within the Hampton voting district. It's a pretty big deal. And as we all know, there's that other dwelling on the overall property for which they're seeking a special use permit to operate as a shorter stone. Obviously, this property, as I've said before, has changed hands numerous times. It's been left abandoned. I think some commercial use of it makes sense, but there's a lot embedded in this application, a lot to sort out. We have to hear from the public. This is a big deal. It really is. The location, the scope of what's being proposed. So if that, Mr. Light, makes sense, maybe we ought to just put it forward to a public hearing, and then in the interim period, make sure that we get all the help we need from legal counsel on the subdivision question Mr. Henry raised, and that you've raised again, and anything else we identify in here. There's a lot in this application that we really have to think through in terms of what they're proposing, number of people, events, etc. We definitely need to get to a public hearing at the planning commission, and we need to wrestle with it internally before it goes anywhere beyond our body.
Thank you for that, Mr. Whitson. I tend to agree. I guess the question is, are we ready to move it to public hearing now, or are there other questions or matters of completeness that are at issue? I tend to agree with you that the issue with this is that there's just a lot of moving pieces, and it seems like there's general support to trying to get this property back into some viable use, and just a lot of devilish details to work out. But I don't know, I'm gonna just look to my colleagues here, but Mr. Whitson, was that a motion?
I just put it out there for discussion. Let's hear it from our colleagues.
Okay. Anyone care to opine?
Could I say something
Please.
in response to Mr. Whitson's comment? I feel confident that we'll be able to produce the title work and to deal with the question. I wasn't aware of Mr. Henry's email until I was literally walking to the meeting this evening. That's not something that'll be terribly time consuming, and we'd be able to have that as part of the application materials well in advance of the public hearing if the commission was inclined to advertise this for the next meeting. We'll get that done.
Thank you. I'm not seeing much will to speak, Mr. Whitson, so you might want to reconsider whether you want to make that a motion. Oh, I'm sorry, Ms. Ishii, would you?
I guess there are some differences between a conference center and a country inn. So I guess I would like specificity from the applicant as to which one they are.
And I would caution you not to confuse our two definitions, which are very similar. Conference center or resort, which involves lodging.
Right.
And conference center / convention center, which does not include lodging. One is for rural areas, the former, conference center or resort, and it is for more than 40 persons in a rural setting, as I noted earlier.
And that is, in your judgment, the best fit for this particular application because of the 200.
The inn is the appropriate fit, which it appeared to be. This is the logical fit if there are going to be more than
Events.
40 people involved in engaging in temporary lodging, meals, entertainment, recreation, or etc.
Yeah, from your earlier preamble on this matter, I think you've got it right, that the events potentially kick it into that category. And again, there's, as is always the case with our code, and as both the blessing and the curse, we have these are all conditioned potentially uses that, we have general standards to apply. So I think we could get there by either road, but it sounds like the recommendation is to go the conference center / resort approach. And I certainly support that.
So conference center.
Yeah, Mr. Curry, whether that route or Country Inn, those are both special exception paths, is that correct?
After the May amendments, a Country Inn is a SUP, and a conference center or resort is an SE.
I feel strongly this, like I said, I mean, it's a big deal. And I think the path we follow should send this to the board of supervisors, and I think the contemplated level of activity there suggests that resort definition would fit. I do think it should require a local governing body review. We had I guess prior to that change, the Country Inn definition also led through an SE permit to the Board of Supervisors, and that was important in the case of Clark Lane and the proposed project there, and this is on a much greater scale, so I definitely think we want this going to the Board of Supervisors, because that's broad countywide implications. And just to move this along, I would go ahead and move that we schedule this request for a special exception permit for a conference center resort to a public hearing.
So I'm gonna, in the I know I think both Mr. Brown and Ms. Ishii would like to say something, but I'm gonna go ahead and, go ahead and speak now, but we have a motion on the table.
Again, it was just that the applicant concurs in that, Mr. Chairman.
Yes.
We're fine with it being considered under the conference center / resort.
Understood, thank you.
I'll second. Thank you.
Okay, so we now have a motion duly made and seconded by Mr. Sharp. Ms. Ishii, I know you were trying to say something earlier. Would you like the floor?
Thank you, that's very kind. Yeah, I don't know that I necessarily have any objection to moving it to a public hearing. It's probably appropriate. I do think there's a lot of moving parts here. I'll say that the additional in 170-65N, additional standards for conference centers or resorts, which is what we're operating under, Mr. Curry, then that would be where we are, Mr. Brown?
Yes, ma'am.
Okay. I would agree that sounds more appropriate for this application, so I'm assuming then that essentially we switched the application to be a request for the conference center. I'm sorry, I'll move this closer to the, so in that case, it says, in no case shall the density of development as measured by two-person occupancy units exceed 8 units per 25 gross acres.
That's actually the same term in the Country Inn.
Right. So in that case, how many occupancy units are you seeking? Is your client seeking?
For the entire parcel unsubdivided, it would be 24 total units. It's 79 acres.
Okay.
So to get to the 40 people in 20 units, we would have to have 62 and a half acres in the N parcel. If my math is correct.
So you're asking for a total of 24?
No.
20.
The application is only asking for 20.
For 20. I'm sorry.
And that's what led us, again, initially to think that this was supposed to be filed as a Country Inn, because that one even talks about that the maximum is 40 occupants. So we were thinking in terms of lodging and not thinking so much in terms of the other uses like the events and so forth. So, yeah, no, there would be no intention to increase the maximum number of lodging units, even if this is being considered, and they're limited to the 20 units, 40 occupants.
Okay.
Thank you. Any other discussion?
Thank you.
So the motion before us that's been seconded is to move this to public hearing under the conference center and resort provisions that would take it as a special exception permit to the Board of Supervisors. In the interest of keeping track, maybe we'll do a roll call vote. Mr. Whitson.
Sorry, just one more discussion point before
Please.
we vote. I would encourage every member of the planning commission, with Mr. Brown and the owner's permission, of course, to go out and walk that property and
They gave that
see
permission
where.
when they applied.
What's that?
They gave that permission when they applied for the permit.
Okay, so, between now and our public hearing, please go look at the property and think about it and wrestle with what's proposed there. It's important.
Great, thank you for that.
Yeah,
Thank you. Would you now like to vote on your motion?
I'll vote aye.
Thank you. Mr. Schulin?
Aye.
Mr. Kohler?
Aye.
Ms. Ishii?
Aye.
Mr. Sharp?
Aye.
And I too will vote aye, so thank you very much. We can move that one forward. Which brings us to the last item on the agenda, that is the preliminary review of the potential zoning ordinance amendment for the short broadband / public safety towers. I'm not sure, Mr. Curry, Ms. Summers.
I can give you an introduction on this. The Board of Supervisors is coordinating with the Broadband Authority, with whom they're familiar with, to try to put together a scenario that is advantageous to commercial providers to expand broadband in the community. One of those things that those providers talked about is possibly an easier route to construct short towers for broadband systems. And as envisioned in the draft ordinance, which is provided in the materials that I have on the screen, is adding a new category of telecommunications facility, which now you have categories 1 through 4. This would add category 5, and it would be a facility that is 80 feet or shorter and for broadband or public safety. And for those short towers that are for broadband or public safety, the rest of the changes suggest an administrative approval process. This is a very big departure from tall towers, as you know, need to go through a pretty exacting public hearing process. So the Board of Supervisors reviewed the draft that is in the packet and referred it to the Planning Commission for your review, massaging if necessary, and requested that you move it to public hearing quickly, perhaps with a joint public hearing. Just so happens you worked out a schedule earlier tonight where such a schedule could be made where a joint public hearing could happen on July 7th. So if the Planning Commission can get comfortable with the language that's provided or make any suggestions you feel are appropriate between now and your next meeting, you can authorize that version to be sent to public hearing for July 7th and joint at the same time you hold the other joint public hearing.
Thank
Mr. Goff and Ms. Summers and I prepared the draft that's here. But that doesn't mean that the various protections for the administrative permit are appropriate in the eyes of the Planning Commissioners or Board. Some of the key points are that it would have to be 1,000 feet away from a primary highway. So that's any road that has a route number that's less than 600, which for us it's 211, 522, 231 for the most part. No tower lighting, even if FAA doesn't require it, we don't want it. They can't be located in the floodplain, which is a similar requirement for the other types of towers. It can't have wetland fills or anything like that. And rather than require a site plan, which is a very specific set of requirements in the ordinance called a site plan, it requires a scaled plot plan. So something to scale, showing where it is on a parcel rather than a full engineered drawing at this permitting phase. It states that the fall zone facility must have a radius equal to or greater than 110% of its height as measured horizontally from the boundaries of adjacent parcels under different ownership. And it says a shorter radius may be approved if there is included in the permit application a notarized statement from the neighbor saying it's okay. And so there may be some situations where optimal placement would put this near a property line, and you can do that if your neighbor says it's okay. And you can put it right next to your house if you say it's okay. This is not a 200-foot tower that's very massive. These are going to be shorter towers that are less massive, given what they need to do. And then lastly, they would have to submit drawings showing where all the appurtenances are going to go and how it's all going to connect up. The intent is to make this a much more streamlined process. That said, it's still a tower in our community. Towers are not always received well. An 80-foot tower is a much different discussion. It's around tree top height in this area versus 200 feet, which is obviously a much different discussion.
Mr. Curry, I was trying to, in a discussion earlier today with this issue, I was trying to locate sort of called the legislative history. There was a provision in our zoning ordinance regarding wooden towers. So could you explain the hook there, please?
And that would be the other change at the same time would be to eliminate that exemption, which is in 170-12. The very beginning of the zoning ordinance where there are exceptions and carved completely out of the zoning ordinance, you can put up an 80-foot wooden pole on your site right now for broadband. The county's not going to be involved in where it goes, how many you can put up, or anything like that. It's totally exempted from the zoning ordinance. Rather than just throw in non-wooden poles into that exemption, the option staff chose was to permit it administratively, so you at least have to jump through certain hoops. I did mention also in the air rating, it also it has to have non-reflective coating and things like that to camouflage these towers. Can't just be icicles, as we're familiar with. So some of that language maybe you want to tweak to better align it with the comprehensive plan. When the comprehensive plan was adopted, it incorporated language that supports these administrative process for 80-foot towers for broadband public safety.
Great explanation, thank you.
Thank you. Go ahead, Mr. Cole.
I just have a question. Does this mean that anybody can just put a tower on their property, or are these meant to be commercially distributed, or how is this?
So today, if you're serving yourself, you can put a tower to receive your own signal. But if you're going to serve, and this states that you would be able, in the definition, which is way back at the top, you can serve yourself or anybody else.
So
you could be, the way these sort of things would likely play out for a commercial provider is there would be a tall tower, say the Scrabble Tower that was recently permitted, and it would be a hub and spoke sort of arrangement where that tall tower would then send a signal to the short tower. The definition also would allow microwave to be used to send data between towers. So that is also in the definition.
So, and the ultimate goal is to provide broadband, wireless broadband service to a portion of the county?
Correct, or public safety.
But not along 211 within 1,000 feet?
And that is there.
Yeah, what is the idea there?
We don't really want to see these on our scenic vistas, and along those heavily traveled roads, if you have one that is an 80-foot pole that is just outside the right-of-way, it's going to be noticeable. Maybe that 1,000 number should be 500, maybe it should be 5,000. At some point in time, if it's too large, it loses its benefit. If it's too small, then the administrative protections maybe don't provide what this community would like to see. And you will hear from the community because you will have to have a public hearing to adopt this ordinance. But once the ordinance is adopted, it's a by right ability to put these in. So the commercial side likes a by right process rather than a public hearing process because there's certainty if they follow the right steps. That's why it's important to get the right protections in the ordinance for what hoops they have to jump through to get that by right authorization.
Mr. Schulin, I think you had the floor. Would you like to keep it?
170 the wooden tower section,
12.
What was that? 12, thank you.
Is it 12B?
Yes.
So if I may, so I read 12B, exempted from the provisions of this chapter, and I'm reading this for the first time, is any and all equipment for the transmission and reception of wireless broadband internet-based communication services when such equipment is installed on property owned by a subscriber to such services. So that is limited to basically like, Piedmont Broadband or whomever, putting something in a tree in your yard or,
And it states that that can be used for other property owners in that exemption. This definition expands that. It does not require the person in the new definition on the screen to be a subscriber.
so I have a general sense of the urgency of this and the need for it, but not actually, I am sorry to admit, a specific sense of that. Perhaps you could clarify that somewhat.
We're not exactly sure where broadband is going, deployment is going in our community. The Broadband Authority just had a meeting Monday, spoke with a commercial provider. The Broadband Committee before them has spoken to several commercial providers. One route for broadband could be fiber optics routed to every parcel, which is very, very, very expensive for every household. Other options are wireless, which require a vertical asset and then the provision to a home, or some mix of the two. So without a provision such as this, the wireless provider would have to go through the entire permitting process, whether they want an 80-foot tower or a 200-foot tower. We know here in the county, we don't allow anything taller than 200 feet in our ordinance. So they would have to go through that process. Now, if the county wants to facilitate the deployment of broadband, this is one way that you could do it to provide those providers a little more certainty. They will need more short towers than they would need tall towers, but they may like that bargain of more short towers that are certain and less viewable to our citizens than fewer tall towers. And there may be so much grant money coming our way, we don't know, that we can do fiber. And the Broadband Authority is trying to sort all that out right now.
Right, and the specific impetus for this change was during the CARES Act fund appropriation discussion last year. Piedmont Broadband at the time, just to put into context how quickly technology changes, at the time, I mean last year, Piedmont Broadband was really the only viable wireless provider in the county that was providing service, and our complaint or our concern about any county investment in a private provider like Piedmont Broadband was that their infrastructure was soft, meaning their relay points or their access points largely are in trees. And so at the time, with that one provider trying desperately to expand broadband coverage, particularly in the context of school-aged children not being able to go to class remotely and reliably, it was a move to basically pave the way for a provider like Piedmont Broadband to use what are called roam towers, which is a brand name, it's a lattice tower, because from a practical perspective, you can't build a wooden tower on remote ridge tops. So that was then, and this is now, and frankly, at the Broadband Authority meeting, hearing Chantel talk about serving, I think Mr. Frazier was exactly right, and I had the same concern, serving maybe a fifth or 2/5 of county households and needing 12 cell phone towers to do it. Ms. Donahue asked the question, could you do it with 80-foot towers? And the answer was maybe or probably. So this is really, as Mr. Curry expressed, it's a practical step forward saying to our citizens, we need to do something and get going on accommodating some kind of wireless solution that's affordable and that can be deployed relatively quickly. My personal hope is that Starlink really moves out of beta testing and into a commercially scalable offering so that we never see a single darn tower in our county for broadband purposes. And the way things are moving, maybe that will happen. But in the meantime, we need to at least have on our books a relatively nimble way to allow wireless providers to at least come in and present us with a plan for providing service, and that's the spirit of this change.
Other questions or comments by the commissioners?
If I may, so I definitely appreciate the spirit in which this language is offered, and I understand, the board, as the broadband authority, our new broadband authority has been working very hard on this, as well as the broadband committee prior to that, to come up with solutions that fit our needs as a scenic county, and providing broadband and internet services to kids in school and older folks who need senior services and everybody else in between. So if the board feels this is urgent and wants to move it to a public hearing, then I think we should do that. I will note some questions on this. I have the opportunity to listen in on the Broadband Authority meeting, the recent one. And as you say, Ms. Ritson, Chantel, for example, said to serve, they have a federal funding that would allow them to work on an area in the Piedmont district, primarily, partly in near Woodville as well, that would allow them to provide service to 895 homes potentially, which is a quarter of the county. But as you say, it would require 12 towers, and they didn't know whether 80-foot towers would be sufficient or whether it would require 60-foot towers sometimes, or 100-foot towers or more sometimes. And I also note that administrative review, just to be clear, I think, the provisions that are in here do provide some parameters, but if somebody comes in and meets those parameters, it takes away the discretion of the community to have any input on it. So I wonder, and also, as you say, Ms. Ritson, as we think of other opportunities that may be coming forward quickly, or not quickly, we can't predict for sure, whether there might be, whether the board is considered or whether the planning commission might consider reviewing this in terms of, do we need language like this that across the board exempts from a special exception permit all 80-foot towers, or should we be potentially focusing in on the towers that we know that our preferred providers need and maybe giving some special consideration to those? And I say this, or other things that are maybe a little less sweeping than to exempt all 80-foot towers. I don't know. I haven't looked closely enough at this to have a position per se, but
These still would be subject to administrative zoning review. So this is not a green light that you do it. I mean, there's still a process in place. It's just not by way of permit. And if I'm mischaracterizing that in any way, Mr. Curry, feel free to clarify.
Well, it's a permit, it's just that doesn't happen to be require a special use permit or a special exception.
Correct.
And it wouldn't be for any 80-foot tower, it would be just for broadband and public safety.
Which is probably most, but not all.
does that mean it would go, but it would not go through a public hearing?
No, the public hearing would be the ordinance change, and this would be similar to any other use in the use table that has a P, right? And so in that use table, you would then, these are handled a little bit differently in a different article, but in the use table, we have a number of uses that have P permitted by right, SUP or SE. And so a single family residential is permitted by right in pretty much all of our zoning districts, say commercial. And the planning commission and the board of supervisors don't consider each one of those. The zoning administrator considers those and only grants a permit if they meet certain minimum standards, like a minimum acreage or setbacks or things like that. So this is just another category that would be allowed by right, so long as it meets certain minimums. And so it is very important for the planning commission and the board to consider what are those minimums that would provide the correct amount of protection for all future applications for these sorts of things.
I understand. That makes sense. Thank you very much for that explanation. But but it is correct that would not be for a public hearing. That would be a by right use as long as they met whatever standards finally were passed in the ordinance. So I would, I note the concern with which the community has viewed towers for various reasons. People have a variety of reasons, and it's quite possible that you could craft administrative standards, but it would be a very big change. I will say that I perceive it as potentially that way. I'd also just note that our telecommunication ordinance right now, which is very has a lot of restrictions in it and a lot of opportunities for public input, is out of date, woefully out of date. There were amendments to the Virginia Code that were passed in 2018 that are very different than what we have in there now. And we just passed language in our comprehensive plan, which is very detailed language, as you may recall. And it really sets out a lot of aspirational, if you will, very strict requirements on the siting of these. It's certainly, our ordinance does not necessarily match up with the comprehensive plan language either. So I think there's a certain number of moving parts with telecommunications language, and again, if the board feels this is important to move to a public hearing, I think that's what we should do. But I just note that there are, maybe one consideration might be whether these are all looked at in toto, these various amendments that we really do need to make to our telecom ordinance, and whether this should be thought of in those terms. And along those same lines, again, these are technical issues. Some of these are highly technical issues, and I think that the benefit of having a professional consultant who's an expert on telecommunications might, again, help us get to a quicker endpoint than just try to muddle through it without that. So I'll put that out there as well.
Thank you. I guess I'd like to pick up on a couple of aspects of that, if I might. And you started to touch on this. You think you said most, but not all. I guess one of the questions I had is don't all of the current wireless cell phone towers typically provide broadband in addition to whatever else they're providing? So I guess I fail to understand what type of tower wouldn't be allowed in this manner, again, considering like the current suite of Sprint and AT&T towers.
I think it's conceivable to think that the cell providers may fit into this definition, and you could craft a definition as you see fit to rule them in or out. Radio and TV type uses, which you don't see very often, certainly would not fit.
Right. Yeah, I think that gets to, at least the piece of what Ms. Ishii said that concerns me a little is that I don't feel qualified to make that, how we would make that distinction. I do think that's something of an important distinction. And just one other point about the administrative review, that would be if there was a desire to have some kind of camouflaging or something other than just the 80 feet and the construction and painting to make these things less visible, would it be reasonable and appropriate for the ordinance to empower the zoning administrator to provide additional screening or other requirements? I mean, is there a way for us to get more of a site-specific visual treatment of this without trying to anticipate in advance every possible scenario? I mean, could you comment on that?
You can try to codify any language you think would capture that. It says right now that facilities shall bear a coating that is neutral and non-reflective. The comprehensive plan has some slightly different words about trying to do that, but the Planning Commission can craft whatever words you wish to serve that need to be protective.
Yeah, I understand, but I'm trying to get from a practical standpoint about what is reasonable to expect.
The more objective it can be, the better.
Yeah.
While knowing that camouflaging is a rather subjective topic.
I mean, one thought I have, an 80-foot tower standing out on a hilltop that doesn't have anything around it is pretty different than an 80-foot tower surrounded by 70-foot trees. And so my inclination of one consideration would be to, allow this within a certain height of the surrounding tree line, so that we're kind of naturally building in some kind of screening. You cringe at that. I mean, that's the kind of thing I think about when I think, could we make some kind of objective standard?
Unless you're gonna put an easement on the trees so they never cut down, that doesn't do you, that's a point in time protection. These towers, by nature of their height, generally are not as big, wide, structurally sound, as Mr. Fraser noted. They're usually a lattice tower that may be 2 feet wide at the base and a foot wide at the top. So from 1,000 feet, even on a ridge, you're gonna be hard pressed to see the tower. You might see the attachments, and so you potentially try to get in some more restrictions on how massive the towers are. But the more restrictions you place, the less valuable it is to the providers.
Understood.
The more restrictions you place, the better protection it is for the community, and that's why you make the big bucks.
Yeah, right. Well, on that point about the nature of these, I guess the other variable then, if these towers are kind of lighter service, if you will, for lack of a better term, it sounds like the number of antenna or something would also be naturally limited. Would that be, in your judgment, a better, another way to approach this, so we're not, stacking up some massive arrays of sort? I mean, I'm trying to anticipate the various unintended consequences that could emerge from something like this.
I suppose if they're a very preferential location, somebody could put a very stout, fat tower up and hang 4, probably 3 cell providers on there, unless you rule them out in the definition. And maybe that's not something you want to see, you want to protect against. If you want to restrict this only to a wireless internet service provider, there may be ways you can word that, as opposed to a AT&T, Verizon, or T-Mobile.
Okay. Well, I know it's getting late, and we've been batting this around, and this is a preliminary review. I guess my inclination is that, in the interest of the importance of this issue, that we move it on to for a public hearing, and that we, in the meantime, take the opportunity and to flesh out some of these things that we've discussed. So I guess I'd entertain a motion of that sort if anyone would be so inclined.
Am I to understand that it would be the same schedule as the earlier?
That would be ideal.
Joint public hearing?
That would be ideal.
Could I intervene on that? I think these are, the renewable energy stuff could, that's very, very time sensitive. Although this is time sensitive, it doesn't strike me as time sensitive, potentially as a renewable energy. As I understand what we're saying here is we want to put forward something that shows we're making progress on this, rather than having a pressing application that absolutely needs this. And I think the issues in here are important. I'll just say, for example, I think there's a lot, when you start digging into this, there's a lot of meat there. For example, Albemarle County, I don't remember this precisely, but I looked into it at one time. I believe for their camouflaging for set towers of a certain height, they actually do require them to be set in a tree line. And yeah, they have an easement on the trees. You can't cut them down. And if they do get cut down, you got problems. So, places, jurisdictions do handle these in a variety of ways, and it might be worth taking the time to look at. So I don't want to slow it down, but whether we put it on as a joint hearing with the renewable energy provision, which I think has a certain amount of urgency associated with it, I don't know that. Is that required? Is that essential? And is there that much urgency on this as well, Gary?
I think some of the timing was driven around the upcoming state grant application cycle. Grants due in September, mid-September, with notice to applying for the grant in July, and so there's an interest to, if we're going to have a partner and attract a partner, the partner's going to know how much skin in the game they have, and they think we need to have, and they want the state to have. And some of this would be helpful, would be a known rather than a variable.
Yeah, this is, I mean, I would say that this is about the minimum that we can do from an infrastructure standpoint in the near term to at least, as Mr. Curry just said, just show some level of thoughtfulness and certainty that a potential partner might be able to latch onto in making a reasoned proposal for the installation of some kind of system and service. So I do think, from a broadband perspective, we gotta keep moving on this. So I would put forward a motion consistent with what Mr. Light already articulated, and let's do a joint meeting with Board of Supervisors on this. I believe the date was July 7th.
Joint public hearing.
Yeah, I would just.
Sorry?
Joint public hearing on July 7th?
Yeah, Mr. Light, I think, captured it all, so I would just go ahead and make that motion that you welcome.
I guess to Ms. Ishii's point, to me, because we have clarity of language doesn't mean that we're stuck to that language. I think we get the hearing, we get the feedback, we do the diligence that you're describing, we just put ourselves on a timeline so that this is moving. So that's why.
That diligence happen between now and June 16th, if at all possible.
I was thinking a work
Because
session.
at the June 16th meeting,
We'll approve the
you
language.
fix the language you want to push out to public hearing.
There you go. So we have till June 16th to explore some of these notions that we've articulated here and perhaps look at what other jurisdictions have done along the lines of what we've been describing. So
I'll second Kier's motion.
terrific. We have a motion made and seconded. Any further discussion?
I'll just say I'm somewhat very regretfully probably going to vote against that, just because I think between now and June 16th is a short period of time for us to look at the renewable energy part, and trying to do both seems a little tough. So, but I fully in concert with the desire to get this straightened out. So I'm going to vote, I think, against this particular motion, but not against the principle.
Appreciate that.
Well, yeah, Ms. Ishii, I would just add that I think this, again, falls into the category if we need to retain outside counsel with the budgeted funds that remain for fiscal year 21 for the planning commission, and cautioning against tying Mr. Curry's hands, but I think we need to do what we need to do to get either county staff or outside legal counsel involvement to bear on this to move it along. This is not, we can't get bogged down as members of the planning commission in the nitty gritty. We gotta get help for the sake of the public interest. So.
Yeah, for what it's worth, I do think some clarity around what we mean by broadband technology and something a bit more manageable, but that differentiates between some brush of some big but short set of antenna and sitting out in the middle of a clear area, and something that truly is camouflaged in some way strike me as manageable tweaks if we think about them and maybe work toward them and look for other examples. We have a motion before us and
So
seconded.
are we asking staff as part of this motion then to get some outside counsel on this? So that we have maybe a little deeper definition of what we're going to end up voting on?
We can, and my concern here is that these are more legislative type decisions of what protections you want to put in place, as opposed to the solar side, which is more of a complex legal matter, and the state law keeps changing and making sure we're on a firm ground. We got somebody engaged, we can talk to them about all kinds of things.
I guess the two areas that I see that are worthy of some additional, or maybe it's three, is one is how do we really keep these to be, it used to be a kind of a small monopole that doesn't have a big array. So how do we constrain that in some way? How do we deal with the camouflaging and the difference between a tower that's sort of just above the treetops and obscured by trees versus out in a clear area. And maybe we don't care, but I'd like clarity on the distinction between what's a broadband versus your basic cell tower. So to me, those are the three areas, whether it, how those are articulated, those strike me as the areas that this commission and likely the public would want us to flesh out a little better.
Could we go ahead and vote?
Any further discussion?
No, thank you.
All right. All in favor? I'll start with you, Mr. Sharp, since you seem to be.
Aye.
Yes. Ms. Ishii?
No.
Mr. Kohler? Mr. Schulin?
Aye.
Mr. Whitson?
Aye.
And I too will vote aye. And I believe that concludes the items on our agenda. And if others agree, I would entertain a motion to adjourn.
So moved.
Do we need to, or we don't need to recess? We didn't leave anything. I think we can adjourn, right? Okay. I have a motion. I'll second. All in favor?
Aye.
Aye. Thank you very much. Good evening.
Mr. White, thank you very much for stepping up this evening.
Well, at least